inadvertently went to the Magnolia Hotel, and we're shuttling them over as we speak. So we're gonna just sort of take a slow approach to launching this. And I share that with you because when we do finally get them here, they're gonna scurry on into the room. And so for those of you who have the coveted aisle seats, maybe you might want to scoot toward the center so it's easier for us to accommodate them. Sorry for those of you who came early to get those seats. Obviously we appreciate your patience and understanding of those issues.
I have all my displays turned off.
A few other housekeeping items. I'm going to ask Monty to just introduce to you some of our technologies that we use to enable you guys to ask questions. Obviously, after the sessions, we really value your opportunity to give us an input and have a Q&A. So we have a Slido tool that Monty's going to explain to you now, and some of the other issues. And this is all part of my stalling technique to let that shuttle arrive. So here you go, Monty.
That's what we in the UK government call filibustering.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, not right now.
Pre-welcome everyone. So thank you very much indeed for coming. So this is a little bit of an experiment for us. I saw Mike Ramsey there. Mike, thank you very much indeed for hosting this today. We decided to bring this into a nice intimate environment. So we're a sellout when everyone gets here. And we deliberately went to look for a place that had an audience that maxed out at about 150 people. Because those of you who know sort of societal and tribal sciences, when you get to about 150, you move from being a family or a tribe into a broader society, and you stop communicating together. So this meeting is very, very much about communication. We go through many of the talks we try and have as experiment from the audio in a minute. Relatively brief, more TED style talks that will be mixed in with the traditional, more the problem, brother? Very good. We talk? Great stuff. It's very, very echoey down here. I think we're getting a lot of gold back here. So, we're going to be using an online question system. So if you go to your phones now, if you can, and get online, if you go to slido.com, then there's a code you'll need to put in there, which is Ebpom, EBPOM19. And by using that online system, not only can you vote on some of the polls that we have, of which the first one is who are you? We're just going to try and work out what the audio challenges at the moment. Is it this one that's rubbing, or?
Monty, is there Wi-Fi?
There is Wi-Fi. Yes, network. So if you go into the Baylor S&W.
Control.
Yes.
I just use the hand.
Yes, that's ours. They use the hand.
Okay.
Right, I'll use the podium. So, there's a guest network. When you go in there, there's a disclaimer that you have to check off. That will get you in there. And once you're in to slido.com, then we're going to ask you to, one is to consider doing the poll. That's great. People are starting to pile in. And this is a natural word cloud. And it does allow you to spell anesthesia both ways. So that would differentiate. Some of you in the room can spell it both ways, and you're allowed to. And we'll see what the larger group is. There's 21 so far, so please keep voting that up. We also have some polls running, and we started the poll about post-operative complications going a couple of days ago. There are some more choices than those you can see on the slide here. Now the reason for this is there's a lot of discussion ongoing about myocardial injury in the form of so-called MINS, which is a troponin rise post-operatively, plus or minus more traditional sort of myocardial infarctions. Whereas one of the big debates that's ongoing is for those of us who look after patients on a regular basis undergoing major surgery, intra-abdominal surgery, for example, they're not the major complications that we see. So perhaps you see more, I don't want to lead the witnesses, but things like respiratory complications, infections, GI tract dysfunction, aka delirium. So please do join in that poll. We're going to let that poll run for a few days, and it is a global poll. So people are voting and will continue to vote around the world. So if you're also a social media enthusiast, please do tweet, Twitter, Tweed, LinkedIn, Fast Doodad, whatever it is that you're laughing at me now, thanks. The people who know social media. I do a bit of tweeting, that's about as far as I go. And there is such a thing as tweeding, by the way, for the older person. The other thing that we're doing in this meeting is we are live streaming to the world. So when the on-air light goes on, we are actually transmitting. Joel, how are we doing with the live stream? Are we out there at the moment then? We are, great stuff. So you can go to the Top Med Talk website, and in there's a live stream link. And if you want your relatives, your loved ones, your friends to watch around the world, then they can join in this big conversation. 7 minutes of filibustering to go. So might have to tell you some stories. Brian, welcome. Were you with the group that was sent to another facility?
They are en route, and apologize for the confusion on the logistics, but they'll be here in about 5 or 6 minutes.
Not at all. It's all part of the fun. When you decide to live stream to the world, you've got to take the rough with the smooth. So hello world, by the way. Mum, if you're watching, well done. And when we get into the presentations, as I said, a lot of it will be Q&A. So once we've had the initial presentation, we'll be getting onto the sofa and into the comfy chairs. And then the question component. Oh, is there another spanner thrown in there, Saul, that we need to know about? You should come up here and feel some of this pain with me, brother. You can just sit down there and enjoy it. There's a question section in Slido as well. So if we switch to the questions. The first question there is, for example, what is the International Board of Perioperative Medicine? What a great question. Has anyone heard of that yet? Some of you in the room? Well done. Tim Miller, who's on the board of the International Board of Perioperative Medicine, has heard of the International Board of Perioperative Medicine. So if you search the International Board of Perioperative Medicine when you finish playing with Slido on your search engine, you'll find a landing page there and a group of individuals from around the world who got together a few years ago to try and make sure that as the specialty of perioperative medicine matures, that we're trying to work off a single curriculum globally. So in the United Kingdom, for example, we had approval of an intermediate, of a basic, intermediate and advanced curriculum in perioperative medicine approved by our General Medical Council about a year and a half ago. So if you train as an anaesthesia provider, a physician anaesthesia provider in the United Kingdom, as a core component of your training, you become uniquely qualified as a perioperative physician. Now that meant that a curriculum had to be approved to go with that, and at the same time, other countries around the world were having similar endeavours. So this group, which is multi-professional, including many non-physicians, surgeons, particularly from the USA, internists, etc., have decided to see if they can articulate a curriculum that would work for everybody. So that's the purpose of it. You don't have to pay to sign up. At the moment, there are no specific diplomas or qualifications, but they lean on the existing things like master's programs, fellowships, etc., around the world that are feeding off this particular curriculum. So if you go in there, most of the web page, apart from the people who've pulled this endeavour together and the so-called interim co-presidents, secretaries, etc., which will be ratified in time, most of what you'll find is a curriculum. So good luck with that one. When and where are the next Ebpom meetings? We always could have designed this, Sol. So Sol, you want to get your microphone again for a second? How many more minutes we've got to make this last?
I think we're getting very close.
Getting close.
You're doing great too, Monty.
So when's the next Ebpom USA meetings coming up?
Chicago, September 12, 13, 14. All of you, please put that in your calendars. 2019, we will be doing this again in Chicago. As some of you recall, who have been at our previous meeting, Chicago was a great hit. We had wonderful feedback, great host site there as well. And so we're going to repeat that. And from the looks of things, I think Dallas is going to probably be on the docket for years to come as well. Mike, thank you for being a gracious host. This has just been logistically great. I think we're getting some of those people who went to the Magnolia Hotel straggling in. Thank you. Just for everybody's clarity, I think we had 2 shuttles and 3 Ubers that are bringing a lot of people in, and it looks like one of them just dropped off. We're going to be here until 5 o'clock, and then we're going for a break at the Magnolia Hotel to be followed by a pretty spectacular evening session at a wonderful room just across from the Magnolia Hotel called the Pegasus Room. I'm saying that so that we're all clear and synchronized about the geography and times that we're going to have to be.
And there's a little bit of food there tonight, Sol, is there?
There will be a lot of food there tonight.
A little bit, a lot of food.
And other surprises.
Other surprises, okay, which we shouldn't give too much away about. But we're also out there having some Q&A of a different style.
So we're going to have a sort of a dinner live radio show forum. Dr. Rick Dutton, who I think I saw right there waving his hand, is going to be our speaker presenter, but really there to accommodate questions that are dynamically posed from the audience and around the world, moderated by Dr. Monty Mython, and interrupted by dinner and music and live entertainment. So it should be a really fun show, and we're looking forward to it.
And anchored by Desiree Chappell.
And anchored by Desiree Chappell. Is she around? Or
She's scurrying around trying to make sure everyone can get here, which is great, and checking on the live streams.
Right.
So the other thing I should mention then, for those of you who haven't signed up or subscribed to Top Med Talk yet, I know most of you have. Top Med Talk is a podcasting station, let's call it that. We put out a podcast, a medically related, broadly speaking, perioperative medicine podcast per day, and we have done for just over a year now. So there's already about 450 podcasts up there. Many of you in the room have contributed to that. It has a sort of cadence through the week, which includes in conversation with people, journal club we do and take deep dive into things. Now, it's all completely free at the moment, and we hope to keep it that way. So our aim was to have 10,000 downloads in our first year, and we've just got to 185,000 downloads. We were hoping to be listened to in a few countries outside of just a bit of Europe and the USA. We peaked at 130 countries, which is great. So I don't know how many people are listening out there today, but the last time we did one of these, we got a message from a surgeon in Australia who said that we were too quiet and we could we turn the volume up, of which I did. So there we go, someone's in already. That's the perioperative coach. That's Monday, which goes out on a Monday. There we go. Where's that one coming from? Well, we got the point. Is that you, Simon? Is that you, Dr. Davis? It's not you. Well, thank you very much. It's real. So on Monday, for example, is the perioperative coach, which has sort of top tips from people around the world on perioperative issues. And on Friday is Poets, which is the perioperative enhancement team. And now we're going to be joined by
Here's the lovely Desiree Chappell.
the lead anchor for Top Med Talk.
Where are we?
Is your mic okay there, Desiree? It's dangerous.
All right, so I think we should get this party started.
Great.
Yeah, good job, well done. So a few more people are coming in from the back. Please grab a seat. Those of you who are in those coveted aisle seats, be prepared to let people sneak past you or scoot toward the center. This afternoon session is really, I think, going to be fun. It's unique. We've been very excited about this format in the past and really look forward to continue it as well. We're going to have 4 key speakers give a presentation that truly is going to bring us to another level, but we're going to follow up each one of those presentations with a moderated Q&A session, and I really encourage you guys to loosen up and feel free to ask questions, because it's been our experience that the dynamic interaction between the speaker and the moderator and the podium and you in the audience, it just brings us to another level. It's a wonderful format and look forward to it. I just want to again thank Dr. Michael Ramsey for being our host for this session, and really your office has just been terrific to work with, and you as a colleague and friend have been a real pleasure. So thank you for allowing us to be in Dallas. Thank you. And I'm going to now hand it over to Desiree to get our first speaker up on the podium and we can start finally. Thank you all for your patience and tolerance.
This one, because I know this works. So let's mitigate all challenges. Hello, and welcome to the third Ebpom USA Perioperative Practicum. I am Desiree Chappell, and I'm part of the advisory board for Ebpom USA. I'm also a CRNA and a provider of anesthesia and perioperative care, so this is something that's very near and dear to my heart and why I'm here today. I want to, again, thank you guys for coming. I want to thank everyone who's listening at home, especially my husband and my kids. They promised me that I would shout out to them, so hi, boys. And mom, too. Hi. So we do have a global audience, as Monty and Saul had referred to. So if you're listening in Australia, can't remember what time, I guess you're 2 hours ahead. Thanks for listening this morning, or in the middle of the night, actually. So without further ado, we're going to introduce our very first speaker today, this afternoon, for the Top Med Talks. We have Professor Carol Peden, and she is going to be talking to us about lessons from the Ebpom trial. And Ebpom is something in our world that a lot of people have heard of, but there are a lot of people that don't understand what that really is. It's the Enhanced Perioperative Care for High-Risk Patients trial. It's fascinating. It's everything to do with quality improvement, which is all very important to us as care providers on the ground. And so, Carol, if you'd come up to the stage and talk to us more about that. Thanks.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me? I don't know if you can hear me in Australia, but I hope so. And thank you to the Ebpom team for inviting me. I've spoken at Ebpom in London a number of times, and I promise you they're not paying me to say this, but going to London in July it's a great meeting, and it's very sociable, and I would highly recommend it. So I'm going to talk about the Ebpom trial, which I'm guessing most of you in the room haven't heard of. It's going to be published. The main trial paper will be out in the Lancet in the next few weeks. We've published a couple of papers already about the implementation science aspects of it, and there will be more to follow. From a US perspective, I'm going to do a bit of translation because I am a Britican. Even though I'm British, I live in Los Angeles now, so I can speak both languages. So this is an NIHR UK funded study, which was equivalent to the NIH here. And it's a very serious approach to doing a randomized controlled trial for quality improvement. And already you'll understand that that brings in some challenges, because quality improvement is very context dependent, and randomized controlled trials try to remove aspects of context. Just going to thank these people who are very key to delivering this project. And I think these are the objectives I was asked to give. I hope you will have an understanding of what this trial was about at the end. It was a big trial, and again, a bit of translation. When it says 93 hospitals, I do understand that there's probably 93 hospitals in Dallas. Obviously, some very important major ones, but in the UK, there are very fewer small community hospitals. And if you have emergency surgery, you will only go to big centres. And so these 93 hospitals were more than half of the hospitals that would do emergency surgery in the UK. So more than half of the major hospitals in the UK participated in this study. We're going to talk a little bit about ethnography, which I'll explain later, and consider why, I want you to think about why some teams, or what the challenges would be on improving this complex care. So the background of this study is that this was done for high-risk patients, and amongst the highest-risk surgical patients are those undergoing emergency general surgery. Not trauma and not vascular, but people coming in with acute abdomens. And there's various papers, and we've summarized the data in this paper at the bottom. But in the American data, about 11% of surgical patients account for 47% of the deaths. And in the UK, it's about 12 and 80%. But basically, the message is a small number of surgical patients, and those are generally emergency general surgical patients, account for a very large majority of deaths. So if you want to improve care and make things better, this is a group to look at. Now, at the time we were conceiving this study, the UK mortality was about 15% at 30 days. The Danish cohort studies, and they have really good data, theirs was 19%, 18.9%. And this is a paper which looked at all emergency general surgical admissions across the UK using hospital episode statistics. And you can see what it shows is that there's some, I don't think the report is working, but down here, the clear dots are low mortality hospitals, and up at the top are high mortality hospitals for the same procedures. So when you see that kind of variation, it's not just about the patients are older, the patients are sicker, this isn't great news. Something is likely to be different. Huge variations in care, huge variations in management of the patient. So that's what we were trying to attempt to do with the Ebpom trial, is to set out a pathway that would be standardized and to improve this really high-risk patient care. So in case you're thinking, well, these Brits and these Europeans are crap at this, we're amazing in America. This was at exactly the same time as we showed 14% mortality in the UK. This is an NSKIP database paper from 37,000 patients in the US with exactly the same mortality that we showed in the UK. So this is a global problem. And actually, the database that we formed in the UK, the NELA, National Emergency Laboratory Audit Database, has now been taken up by Australia and New Zealand to tackle this problem. Again, more US data. This is from Zara Cooper at Harvard, looking at Medicare discharges. And if you were 85 years and older and you had an emergency laparotomy or emergency general surgery, 50% of those patients are dead at 1 year. So this is not a British European problem, it's a pan-world problem. So on that background, we conceived the study, EPOC. This small percentage of patients accounts for a lot of surgical deaths. An emergency laparotomy, which we focused on in this study, is typical of that. The patient care is highly variable, survival is very variable, and that maybe if we took a quality improvement approach with a standardized pathway, we could make things better. Awareness of the issue is also a big problem. How many of you here in this room have pathways in place for emergency laparotomy or emergency cholecystectomy, major emergency surgical pathways? Okay, 3 people. So it's, awareness, and this is coming because as part of the Johns Hopkins AHRQ grant on ERAS, the final year, next year, is going to be emergency general surgery. So what we did, the Royal College of Surgeons in the UK, on the background of this high death rate, had taken not an evidence-based pathway, because again, another problem in this field was there wasn't much evidence, but a Delphi consensus pathway. And we basically took that pathway, which was shown in this paper on the right, and devised a really complex pathway, which I'll show you in a minute. We wanted to create local champions, a lot of awareness about the issues, and give some basic quality improvement training, and then support the teams over the period of the study to see if they could improve care. If you're interested in that document, we've just redone it, and it was released, I've got it on there, but if you go to the higher risk surgical patient, Royal College of Anaesthetists, we've just redone it 2018, and it's a really, I'm biased because I'm on it, but it's a really good document with a lot of key references. So go and have a look. On the background of this study, and I won't dwell on this, we had also at the same time, and it's actually important, at the same time as this study started, we developed this national audit, which was compulsory for all hospitals in the UK to enter data on these patients. And that's important because what we found later in the study was a lot of teams were struggling to see how they would enter data for this audit rather than then do the quality improvement. But that started in December 2013, and this study is actually fully launched March 2014. So the things we're trying to do was have a hardcore pathway that you were going to deliver. And if you think about this, when you see the pathway, you're going to be shocked in a minute because it's complicated. But that's really what we do when we get guidelines from a college or an association or care pathways. We put these complicated pathways in. We say to people, right, here you go, here's a bit of education and training, off you go and do it. So we wanted to support that with quality improvement, building a quality improvement team, helping teams to understand how they would use this data. Don't cancel it. Teach them to do basic quality improvement cycles, testing change with PDSA, and breaking the pathway up into small chunks. This is the pathway. So complicated. But if you think about it, there's 37 steps, which is about the same as is in an ERAS pathway, 37 components, and it's very close to an ERAS pathway, and pre, intra, and post-op. And I can give you all the references, and I'm tweeting the references so you can see them later. But we encourage teams to focus on these key points, which are in grey, on the pathway. So complicated pathway. These are the hospitals. I spent an awful lot of time on train traveling around the UK, visiting various places. So this was going to be a stepped wedge cluster randomized controlled trial, which is really one of the few ways you can do a quality improvement trial very scientifically. We had integrated ethnography, and ethnography is like anthropology of clinical medicine. It's like having David Attenborough at the back of your operating theatre watching what you're doing. Going to capture the data through the national audit. The aim was to recruit 27,000 patients. That's what we expected to get from our background data. And the primary outcome was 90-day mortality. And that was powered to reduce mortality at 90 days, which we knew from UK national statistics to be 25%, to reduce that to 22%. So this is the chart. And the problem with stepped wedge clustered randomized trials for quality improvement is if you started here, you were going to get 80 weeks of improvement time. But more than half the teams got 30 weeks or less, and some teams, there was a 5-week running period, so some teams only got 5 weeks. And for many of you, you'll know that's really hard to do improvement on. So we recruited less patients than we thought, but we still got nearly 16,000 or over 16,000 patients, 7,000 of whom got the quality improvement phase. And you can see that the average age was 68, and they mainly had intestinal obstruction. And those are the patients who often get sat on, waiting, or they can wait till tomorrow. And then one of the key aspects we emphasized in this program was that when the surgeon makes the decision to operate, the patient should be in the OR in less than 6 hours. And as I say, that's because these patients were often, they've been obstructed for a few days, they can wait till tomorrow. We wanted to create that urgency around this. So, did it work? Well, overall, no, there was no difference in the mortality in 90 days between the patients who received the quality improvement and those that did not. But something was going on in the background because we were powered by UK data, so high quality data, to reduce the mortality from 25 to 22%, but the 90-day mortality was actually 16%. And I'll explain a little bit more about why that may be in the background. But essentially, I don't think you can underestimate the background, this national audit going on, the fact that Rupert Pearce, who ran this study with me, was very well respected. There was a lot of noise, if you like, discussion about this study, and people were really thinking about emergency laparotomy. No change in hospital stay either. So that's fine, but the important thing if you're doing a quality improvement trial like this is to dig deeper. Let's discover why it worked or why it didn't work. So we had a lot of evaluation going on in the background. We had at a national level evaluation of the program, and for each individual site, we had some ethnography or a questionnaire. And what we were trying to find out was what worked, what didn't work, why, what have we learned, and what can I pass on to other people about what you should or should not do. So, because ethnography is very expensive and intensive, we only had 6 sites. We had 3 coming in at the beginning of the study and 3 more towards the end. But we had 216 hours of observation of the teams and 53 interviews, which were then deconstructed by the ethnography team, who were separate to the trial team, to look for themes. We also had a 37-item questionnaire for all the leads in each hospital, which would be nursing, anesthesia, surgery, intensive care, ideally. And we had an 86% response rate. And so what did it show? At a cluster level, because the hospitals met in groups of 6, We found that everybody liked the quality improvement aspect. They got the trial. Everybody was very invested in making care better for these patients. And we delivered the quality improvement. They got the training they expected. The problem was we couldn't necessarily get everybody in the room. We had good attendance on the first day, but by the second follow-up training time, attendance had dropped markedly. It was difficult to get the teams in a room together, and basically they really struggled for time. The leads got no time and no funding to undertake this study. Each hospital got £3,000 to help with things like iPads. But essentially we were asking people to do this on top of their day job. And so it's one lesson, I think, is when you think about rolling out an ERAS program or a complex pathway, who's going to do it and how are you going to help them? Another subsequent study, which I can talk to you about over dinner or whatever, is we had more, I would say, buy-in from chief executives. If you don't get the senior leadership brought into these programs to support the teams, it's also very hard. But it wasn't all, bad news. We looked at 10 processes of all those I showed you, 10 key processes in the 80 hospitals that had good data, so we had 800 processes we could look at. And in the time, nearly 300 of those improved. Things like goal-directed fluid therapy got better. And you can see, some things like getting a preoperative risk assessment was relatively easy to do. That improved from 55 to 66%. But interesting, things that are harder, things like decreasing time from decision to surgery from 5 to 4.3 hours, that's hard. And that shows that you were starting to get some system change buy-in at a hospital level. We found that teams did use the quality improvement methodology, and basically in our next paper coming, the more you used some of these quality improvement techniques, the more success you had with improving processes. So we could show a link. So if you had a bit of training, and these teams got 1.5 days training at the most, and then supported by a website and individual phone calls if they needed it. But from a quality improvement perspective, it was really light touch, and it was designed that way so that we could roll out to a lot of hospitals. Another problem was the data collection burden. So we didn't have any data collectors. We were expecting the nurses or the anesthesiologists to enter the data. And there's a lot of data, and the NELA, the national audit, had just started. So teams were definitely coming to terms with how they would do the data entry and not the quality improvement. But we did see, in this paper, I never thought I would actually get something published in the sociology paper as an anesthesiologist, but actually, if you have time, I hate to say it, this is actually a good read, this paper. And basically, it's the interviews from the teams. And what you saw was that people really valued the fact that there was a pathway. And they really valued that we did a formal risk assessment, which gave a number, which could facilitate discussion about how sick these patients were. So in a situation of complexity, when you're operating at night on sick patients and it may not be your area of expertise, having a pathway to fall back on, people found really, really helpful. And that, I can say the patient's risk score is this, therefore the pathway says this patient should go to ICU, is much better than ringing up and saying, I think my patient should go to ICU. You have a formal number and a formal pathway. It created national energy. There was a lot of interest in this study, and there's subsequent studies that followed on from this. Just basically surgeons, everybody presenting, lots of energy, people talking about this. What happened in the background? Well, I showed you that our mortality when we were thinking about this study was 14.9%. It's now 9.5% in the UK at 30 days. So what drove that? Well, I've shown you that we can't say the Ebpom study drove it, but it was very front and foremost, and there's another study that I was part of, which just came out yesterday in JAMA Surgery, called the Emergency Laparotomy Collaborative, which followed on from Ebpom. And so there was these huge studies going on around all the country, backed up by this national data. And some of this may just be the Hawthorne effect. We have to collect the data. We know that we're not doing very well. We're going to work hard at getting better. But it doesn't really matter. That's a lot more patients surviving than did before we started all this. So what does it all mean? Well, for running quality improvement programs in general, for you, having a protocol, a pathway is all very well. Oh, we're going to do education on ERAS. That doesn't achieve very much. You have to work out how you are going to enable the local teams to deliver that care. And we found in our interviews that the social nature of improvement was very important. The teams who were very well networked within their hospitals, so they were mates with the radiologists, they were mates with the emergency department, they were very good at socializing, were much more likely to do well. So get some of those people that like to go around and chat to everybody and get everybody involved. This shouldn't be some project that anesthesia is doing. This is a whole system project, or this type of thing, as is ERAS, that everybody needs to be involved with, feel part of, and it's really important, and it came out in this. Being part of a big study, an NIH study though, did give some of our quality improvement leads credibility to say, we have to do this, it's an NIH study. So if you're going to do a quality improvement program, yes, we did a proper scientific study. It's not necessarily the best way to look at quality improvement because it's so context dependent. And if you're going to do a step wedge trial, you need a very long tail for those at the end of the step wedge. And really, many successful quality improvement programs select hospitals that are ready for change. And by nature of this, we just said, are you interested in doing this study? We didn't select anybody. So in summary, this was a really complex intervention in a really complex area. And delivering effective quality improvement needs resources, executive level support, change management, and social skills, thinking about those social needs for change. But it did massively help change awareness in the UK, and it may have helped drive the overall improvement. We've got further studies to come. The Lancet one should be out soon. We've got one already in implementation science. We're going to do an in-depth dive into 3 sites who did really well and 3 who did not so well. I think lessons in the US is keep it simple. I would go for, and in fact, a subsequent study, we just went for a small number of components we were aiming to improve. And think about how you create that energy, that everybody wants to be a part of this and everybody's talking about it. Thank you. Yep, I'm on the sofa.
But I'll bring this one just in case.
Oh.
There we go. Brilliant, thank you, Carol. So, was that disappointing?
Of course it was disappointing. I mean, I lived my life on this project for, you know, and I think, aside from my personal feelings about it, I think it was disappointing for the teams, because we had 90 teams around the country, and, you know, there was a few, if you look at any kind of John Overit's work from Scandinavia, from the Karolinska on quality improvement, about a third of people will drop out, a third will kind of not do much, and a third will be really good. And we probably saw that, but probably more than that. We had a lot of very dedicated individuals and teams around the country, and so it would have been lovely to say to them, you know, we've really made a difference here. And that's why I want to, you know, play up the fact that a lot of people did improve a lot of complex processes, and we shouldn't lose that.
Because I remember when the result was announced in London at the Ebpom meeting, there was this gasp from the audience, because we were certain there was going to be a difference. We had such belief in the fact that these quality initiatives and endeavours are going to make a big difference. And I think we've had a chance to think about it long and hard now. We think there's a lot of reasons, and you articulate them extremely well here, why that might not have happened. As you say, in parallel, outcomes have got dramatically better.
So yeah, I think that's ultimately, we're trying to make care better for patients is important. And I think taking the learning from this, one of the things, and I'm sure the same could be said in the US for different reasons, was that a lot of our teams faced complexity, organizational change, mergers, and they would get things going, and then the chief executive would leave and the whole organization would change. And trying to deliver quality improvement on that background is very, very hard.
Just going to see if this. I've got another microphone working there. Here we go. We'll get there, team. I'll come to you in a second, Sol, about that. So whether it's right or wrong, thinking about it hard afterwards, my takeaway was sort of, let's call it lighter touch quality improvement. In other words, if you don't put those things in place, if you don't put the time, if you don't invest the time, if you don't invest the change managers, the sort of light touch quality improvement, let's print some posters, let's print some t-shirts and have some meetings, is a waste of time and energy. It's like either do it properly or don't do it.
Yeah, I think that, and that's, there are more and more studies coming out showing that this is tough. Organizational change is tough, and in major industry, they take it very seriously, and we're trying to do it on top of our day job. And so I think you do have to invest in it. I mean, things like if our teams had had somebody who was collecting the data for them, and the study we did subsequently, or I was part of, the Emergency Laparotomy Collaborative, which was more a traditional quality improvement approach, we actually gave their teams their data every month. Whereas in this study, not only were the teams starting to collect it, but we expected them to download it themselves each month. So I think anything you can do to facilitate the information getting to the frontline teams about how they are doing so they can then work on the improvement rather than spending the time at the computer trying to download an Excel spreadsheet is very important.
Because the NELA you referred to, which is the National Emergency Laparotomy Audit, which might actually be a national quality improvement tool, that data acquisition tool and data sharing tool is live.
Yeah, it is now. But again, at the time, remember this study started only 4 months after that went live. As I say, most teams were struggling to get the data in. They didn't really understand the tool, and I don't think now you can go in and you can see how your hospital is performing benchmarked across the whole of the UK. But that wasn't really available at the start of this project. It was for subsequent projects.
Right, I'm going to get Slido up in a second. I'm going to get the microphone out to Sol in the auditorium. If you do want to ask a question or make a comment, please do get your hand up. We'll get a microphone to you. One last thing as I depart the stage for a second and go and sort that out is if you could do it all over again, what would you do differently?
Well, I have to say that a plug for Rupert Pierce was that we were trying to do a randomized controlled trial in quality improvement, and that's what we did, and he did it, and the trial was delivered very impressively. But I do think that focusing on a smaller number of things, it was actually, I think it was the NIH that wanted us to deliver an evidence-based pathway, and that was part of the trial funding, that we had to do a review of the evidence and deliver that pathway. But I think now, as we did aspect as well, is that I think getting teams in the room together, which I admit is much easier in the UK than in the US, getting everybody working on the same things together in the room regularly, and in subsequent studies we did that every 3 months, was very effective. Whereas we couldn't really do that in this study by the nature of the study. So there are definitely some things I would do differently, but there's a challenge. For those of you in the room would say, I don't believe this, it's not a randomized control trial. Well, this was a randomized control trial, but it may not be able to deliver because of the problems in what you're trying to do. So there's a balance between using the right technique for the right thing you're trying to test.
Carol, brilliant presentation, and I would just introduce that I would take away from what you presented a little bit different than perhaps your disappointment. I think there's some very laudable features of what you've done and what you presented, notwithstanding the need to pull through and the rigor that is necessary to pull through effectively and the challenges that go with that to really truly test, if you will, the hypotheses that was introduced. The outcomes, nonetheless, were impressive when you compare them to where you began. And so I beg the question, are large-scale quality control trials therapeutic?
Oh, interesting. Well, I think probably drawing attention to the problem is therapeutic, and getting people to measure and put in metrics so they can start to understand how they would do something about it is therapeutic. So I think those, and I actually think learning, you know, I don't know how many of you in the room have done sort of quality improvement, but I think when you start to adapt, get in your head the system thinking and the number of people that you have to interact with, it's not just about anesthesia, but it has to be about anesthesia, surgery, CRNAs, techs, everybody, then I think that's very therapeutic. And that's actually, it's good for morale too. Everybody's happy. If quality improvement is going well, and I don't necessarily mean by the results, I mean by the fact that you've got a good team together, it's really energizing.
All right, back on? All right, there we go. So I think whenever I speak to groups about starting enhanced recovery, I reference what you've done with the Epoch trial, and that it's, you know, what happened with the outcomes is not necessarily speaking to exactly what happens in real life when you're trying to implement it. And one of the things that people talk about is, one, the complexity of their pathways. And so many people feel like they just have to go gangbusters and you know, put in all these different ones. Are there, you know, specific ones that stuck out, you know, that you believe were really
Well, interestingly, and I've just been talking to Liza Wicks, who's running the AHRQ, will be running the emergency surgery arm next year. I think the difference is that you have to think about why these patients do badly, and it's because they're presenting sick in acute physiological derangement, and you have to get in on that really quickly. But I think from enhanced recovery more generally, I think it's organisation specific, and that's the important thing of getting it. If you're going to start it, get everybody in the room and say, you know, look at all these potential pathway points. What are we good at, and what, if we worked at it and got better, would make a big difference? Because some of the things in an enhanced recovery pathway may not necessarily make a huge difference, but if you don't have very engaged, informed patients, and you think, right, that's something we could work on, that is likely to make a big difference. So start there, I would say. But sit down with everybody early on and get their opinion about what would work for you.
One of the pertinent things too is, you were talking about enabling your team and it kind of empowering them, I guess. You know, a lot of people maybe feel engaged, especially if it's like a grassroots movement, because that happens a lot. Like you said, it's not just a project that anesthesia wants to do. A lot of the times it is that, though. So how do you think, and through your experience through Epoch, you know, trying to get everybody on board from getting that top-down support? I mean, how does that work?
Well, I think, and I know I would speak to Sol on this, you have to get to the chief executive, the executive leadership, and say, you know, this is the reason. You have to have different languages for your different audiences. This is the reason why we should be doing this. These patients, if they don't die, they have long stays in ICU, high complications, readmissions, whatever the metric is that talks to that group of people to get them engaged and get that support and help provide some funding and some time for the other people. So I think it's finding the message for each different audience and bringing them all together.
I would just add that you made the point, there's a difference in culture today between the motivation that we would have to encounter in the States compared to the UK. And I think it does speak to the motivation even within the zip codes within the US to have that sort of burning platform, if you will, to embark on this.
Well, the next move in the UK on this is that hospitals will have to have it's called a best practice tariff, so you have to be seen to be following a pathway, or you will have money withheld. So there is going to be some financial incentive attached.
Interesting. We're going to hear from Mike in a little bit that I think can speak to that. And perhaps he can mention it now. Oh, please, Rick.
Getting a little bit into the nitty-gritty here, how much of a signal did you have about time to OR for these patients? Because the biggest barrier I see as an anesthesiologist is, oh, we can't take this patient to the OR, they need an echo, they need their pacemaker interrogated, they need blood cross-matched, whatever it is. And in the area of emergency surgery, the increasing signal, certainly from the trauma community where I live, is speed wins.
Yeah.
And that the getting to the OR, getting source control of the problem outweighs almost all of the comorbidities and their potential for harm.
Well, a couple of things, as I'm sure you know, in the fracture neck and femur group of patients, then getting to the OR makes a difference in sort of survival. What we were trying to get at with this group was those patients that get lost in the system. They're seen and they've got a bit of obstruction on a Friday, and then maybe, you know, their attending doesn't see them again for a couple of days, and they're seen by. And what we wanted to put that sense of urgency in. And what we found was, even if the surgeon wasn't saying we need to operate now, these patients were being seen more frequently with a much more sort of when do we need to go, proactive approach to that. So I think that was helpful. And actually, in the next study, the emergency laparotomy collaborative study, we saw even faster time to theatre. So people were really getting this in their head that once the surgeon made the decision that this patient is septic or whatever, we have to get on with it. They can't wait till the next day or the next list.
So I'm going to go to some of the Slido questions. Now some of these are more generic from earlier on. So just quickly, where are the exhibitors? If people want to go and see the trade exhibitions, where are they? Along the corridor.
The trade exhibition is along the corridor, and the rooms where we had our workshops this morning along that corridor.
ARA and Medco. Either one of those rooms will get you into the exhibition hall.
And we're live streaming in there as well. So if you want to hang out in there and watch this, you can, which is great. So that's
I heard a rumor that the basketball games
Oh, yeah, maybe. We might be streaming the basketball game, too. I mean, come on, we got to be real bad.
what's basketball? It's okay, we got that.
I don't know, what's football?
So, we'll take the first question here if we may. And although it says perioperative medicine and ERAS, it's really a question about external experts to jumpstart programs in the general sense compared to internal.
That's a really good question. I think, and in fact, I tweeted about it once, and it's my most popular tweet, that it's much easier to go in and be an expert from outside than change things in your own organisation. And that came from, you know, I did a lot of work in Denmark and Scandinavia with IHI, and, you know, you sort of get the red carpet rolled out, and you go home and try to do the same thing in your own ICU, and everybody walks away. So I think it's very helpful if you can get somebody in that whichever tribe, or maybe all the tribes in the organisation, respects and believes in, to say, you know, this is a really good thing, we should get started on this. It's very helpful. Because if you're the frontline person there, even if you're a world expert, you're still, you know, Carol or Mike or whoever. I think it does help. I wouldn't say it's essential, but it is going to make life easier.
And I would add thick skin as a virtue.
Yes. And patience, resilience.
Maybe we should have an exchange program for experts. And we just
There's no doubt about that somebody coming in from outside. I mean, I think our experience with the National Enhanced Recovery Program is they gave us relatively little resource. They did give us access to the data so that you could have honest conversations with people, because everyone's length of stay is 4 days and no one has any readmission rates. And you say, well, that's interesting because I've got your data here. And the other thing they gave us was change management experts who really didn't care. They weren't trying to offend people, but they were really fantastic in saying you were supposed to send a 4-person team along to this quality improvement endeavour. Only 3 of you can come, so you can go now. You know, they would send them out of the room. They would say, you know, we need to regroup on this. We're taking this seriously, and it was.
Another tip we did with Ebpom that did work well is, again, when you come from outside as an expert from a national study and things, you can say, right, the first thing we're going to do, or for the first meeting, I want you to look at 5 case notes or 3 case notes and see if you're all experts on this, did you do this to this standard? And that's not a lot of work. And people will do that and come and talk about it when there's an external facilitator, which they may not do. And often what you find is people do think they're doing the right thing, but they're not always doing it reliably when they look at a very small sample. And that was a very helpful thing. But I think that was easier to ask people to do it coming from outside.
There's another Slido question here. Was there any signal for degree of improvement for any hospitals, i.e. lower performing hospitals showed most improvement? This is my theory at school. Is the sooner you fall behind, the longer you have to catch up.
Yeah, that's...
Is that...
Well, one of the problems with some of the metrics was that and this is again has to be interpreted for US audiences, that one of the metrics was the attending surgeon and anesthesiologist had to be present in the OR. Now, in the UK, you're in your training for 10 years. So you can be 35 and be still a trainee. So I'm not saying you've basically got an intern doing your operation. But we focus very much that these are complex. If anybody should have the senior attending in the room, it should be these patients. And most places were already performing quite well on that. So it was a very hard metric to move. So I think, again, if you're going to pick things where there is room for improvement and you could improve. We are going to look at 3 high-performing, 3 low-performing sites. But again, I think it's going to come down to the context in which they were trying to work.
There's a question here, which I don't know if you're happy to take this one, Carol, because it relates to ERAS in the broadest sense. It says, does this perhaps show that long-term outcomes with ERAS are speculative, short-term, though, metrics such as return to work, resumption of activities of daily living might show benefit? Where do you stand on the do you think ERAS has played out to produce longer-term benefits? Or do you think that's still a known
that's
unknown?
That's a good question. I think we need more of those studies, but I'm an ERAS believer. The next study, the Emergency Laparotomy Collaborative, published in JAMA Surgery yesterday, showed a reduction in mortality down to 8%, but that was not a randomized control trial, so that was on the background of, everybody was improving, although we did get below the national norm. So we have got a study that shows, but that was a simpler study, just looking at 5 components of improvement. I personally think the central tenets of ERAS, of getting patients and families involved in their care, understanding what they're going into, motivating them, getting fit prior to surgery, is going to roll out into longer-term outcomes, but I think we need more data on that.
So we'll take the last one here before we move on to the next speaker. And just to remind people listening at home, if you do want to go onto slido.com, as you listen to the talks, if you put in the code EBPOM19 as shown on the slide here, then you can post your questions from not only in the room but also around the world. We'll pick up on the educational question related to Ebpom and Ebpom later on, but we'll leave you, Carol, with the last one before we get one from the floor, which is if you looked at different sets of hospitals, were some much better than others?
Yeah, there was definitely differences. And again, it went back to the people that were very well socially connected within their organisation, had strong teams to begin with. That did better. I mean, I think not surprising. And also people who were on a stable background where there wasn't a lot of organisational change. And we saw some stunning performances. I won't name hospitals, but I know Dr. Miller worked at one of them, and that was absolutely fantastic. They were really innovative. They got everybody involved, and they came up. My hospital in Bath, we came up with some great ideas that are now used nationally. So there was different levels, but everybody really tried.
That's that Tim Miller at the front there you were referring to.
Yeah.
Carol, kudos on a great.
Sorry, Tony, could you introduce yourself? I should have said that to people. Is that picking up the mic at the moment?
Yeah.
Cool,
Yep.
good.
So surgical bias. I could think of any number of intraoperative decisions that could really impact the outcome of a study this complex, given the difference in pathologies, difference in surgical decision making. But you had the tyranny of numbers. Was there any way to tease out specific surgical decision, intraoperative differences between the high performers and low performers?
No, I don't think so. One of the things, again, was if you go back to some of the earlier studies that preceded this, and I know it's controversial, the goal-directed fluid therapy intraoperatively was, in the ELPQUIC study, was associated with improved outcome and what also was ICU admission postoperatively. So I think the perspective of the whole team treating this patient is very high risk. I think if you go back to some of the earlier NSCIP papers, spending an awful lot of time in the OR, very long surgery in these patients is an issue. But that didn't come out of this, but it's based on some of the NSCIP studies. So nothing specific. There probably is more that could be drilled down, but we were trying to keep this at fairly high level as a whole pathway change.
The reason I bring it up, and it wasn't from a different idea, but we learned in rectal cancer, originally the Swedes did a study, found a very high local recurrence rate, invoked radiation therapy, and it dropped it by 50%, still to a number that most surgical teams would have considered unacceptable. What it all of a sudden turned out at the very end of the discussion was there was a way to do a better operation up front, and the relative benefit of radiation really melted away over time. So I wonder here, something like my bias, overuse of open abdomen could definitely impact outcome. resection with diversion, there are any number of things that could alter that.
Well, and also the whole issue of the patients in whom this is pretty much futile. The patients who are at end of life, and that, all that Zara Cooper and all that group at Harvard looking a lot at that. We didn't overall in the UK see a massive drop in numbers of patients being operated on. So I don't think that was that is the main reason for success. But I think there will be patients now who people will risk score them and look at frailty and things like that, and perhaps have the conversation that this may be futile. So, but I agree, there's so many factors in this.
Right, clock is against us. We had a little bit of a delay in starting, so we pushed the clock back a little bit. Just a huge round of applause, please, for Professor Carol Peden. So our next speaker, enormous pleasure to introduce Michael Inglesby, who we heard speak for the first time at Ebpom London relatively recently, and I think he had one of the best anecdotes. I hope he brings it up again about managing teenagers, which resonated through the crowd. I don't know if we're going to get treated that. It's from the Department of Surgery, from the University of Michigan Medical School, and around the world, one thing we've learned is that we should spend our time trying to match Michigan. So are you going to tell us, Michael, how to get things done? Is the clip playing up there?
We'll see.
Brilliant, welcome.
Good.
Is that on? Can you guys hear me? In the back? Is that on? Yes? Yeah. Say yes. All right, good. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank Saul for giving me such an easy topic, how to get people to do things. So I've never given this talk before. If you want to see a bunch of kind of good science or data like we just saw, then this is not the talk for you. If you kind of like to read social psychology, you may like this, so I'm probably going to hit like one of you. I apologize in advance. We'll see how it goes. Full disclosure, I think Tony and I are the only two surgeons in the room. Any other surgeons? All right, good. I'm a surgeon. So how do you get people to do things? So I'll tell you a little bit about kind of why Saul thinks I may know an answer to this, and probably because, I think the take-home message from Carol's excellent talk was that it was a really ambitious endeavor that was relatively low resourced. And in Michigan, we have a lot of resources to drive change. And that is just a reality, and makes you should ask whether my messages aren't essentially is this generalizable to where you live. In Michigan, we invest in making Michigan the best place for surgical care. It's not me, it's the people who pay for all of the health care. And as a result, care is good. That having been said, still changing people, changing surgeons, changing anesthesiologists is what I spend a lot of my time doing, and I fail almost every time. I've learned some lessons, and this is what they are. I will go through them with little clinical anecdotes. There is a whole science around changing people, and there's a series of books, and there's a whole kind of social network / psychology framework on how to drive change. It can be summarized in this: nothing really works except emotions. Even for people like us, for professionals, even incentives are hard to get to work. It's really an emotional endeavor. Data, maybe a little bit, but a lot of this is emotional stuff. I run this thing called the Michigan Surgical Quality Collaborative. I think it's critical if you're going to go to a place and try to change practice that you have credibility. And as a surgeon, I probably have none in this room right now. So I'm a liver transplant surgeon. I'm an academic, so I write lots of papers. I run this quality collaborative. I'm not an anesthesiologist. I'm not a physician in community practice, so I don't know the challenges of high throughput care. My clinic has 1 or 2 patients. I do 1 operation a week at most. So those are my the limitations of my practice. But I am charged with trying to make Michigan a uniquely good place for the 10 million residents to have surgical care. And with that, we work a lot with the surgical and anesthesia primary care community to drive that change. So hopefully you'll think I have credibility. But the point I want to talk about Carol's talk, that if you go in, if you try to make change from your own, you kind of have to do it, I think the way Saul has done it, we have to go right to the top. I think it's really hard, particularly as a practicing physician, to kind of have credibility when you stand up and try to really drive change unless you're a leader. I think it's a lot easier to drive change at another institution. So if you want to make a big change, I think it's great to invite someone to kind of initiate that process within your institution. I think that's a key step. Credibility is point one. You need to have credibility, know who you're talking to. Two is, and this is really for surgeons, and I'm looking at you, Tony, we are the autonomy lovers. Do not mess. Do not make me change. Surgeons, we all physicians, but surgeons love their autonomy, and they are there to take the best care of their patient right in front of them. And that is the mental model that, at least my audience of surgeons, that's what they bring to every attempt to try to change them. And strategy two is you got to go right after that. You have to call that out as it is and basically kind of put it right out there. You don't want to change because you think you matter. Turns out you don't. So this is 2 years of data in the state of Michigan, and these are everyone who had an elective cholecystectomy, hysterectomy, appendectomy, or colectomy. And this is kind of essentially the proportional impact on patient outcomes of different factors. And the question at hand is, how much do you as the surgeon matter? In the 10% range. So what does that mean? So let's put that in context. If you do elective lap choles, complication rate's 1%. Okay? So of those, let's say you do 100 of them a year, you're going to have one complication. If you're the worst surgeon in the state versus you're the best surgeon in the state, you're going to have to do 1,000 of them for there to even be a difference. So most surgeons are pretty good, and turns out we don't have a huge impact on, and no one believes this, but you can look at it essentially in any operation. As operations get more complex, there is more of a surgeon effect. But liver transplantation, which I'll argue is probably among the most complex operations, is still only about 15 to 16%. Because there aren't really a lot of really bad cardiac or liver transplant surgeons. There's not a lot of variation. Most people are pretty competent. And I don't know how you'd figure out the anesthesia piece, but it's probably very similar. What matters? What matters is essentially patient complexity, and we know that. Comorbidities, and then the context of the care. So is it a good place to get care or not? So the take-home point here is you as a practitioner and your focus on your practice is the inappropriate focus. We teach medical students how to care for one patient at a time, and we're going to give them care, but really the focus needs to change. You need to ponder, and you work for your system. And that is where you need to focus kind of your efforts. Not saying you shouldn't take exceptional care of your patients, but so here's a little question. Picture your ideal patient. So most of us practice medicine. Picture your ideal patient. Think of some words to describe. 3 words. Saul, I'm going to make you call them out. 3 words to describe an ideal patient you would like to take care of. You're a cardiac anesthesiologist, so what would that person be? Healthy, nice, and thin. All right. Let's see. Healthy, nice, and thin. All right. I'm going to keep nice. The other two I'm going to throw out because you ruined my point. I'm going to do engaged, nice, and understanding of delay and time things because we're all running around. Yeah, exactly. So to change it around, and if you put yourself as if you're the patient and you're kind of, how are you to your system? So if the system's looking at you, are you those things? Are you nice? Are you engaged? Or are you like the patient that drives you crazy? The demanding patient who's non-compliant, who in Saul's case is obese and not healthy. But you can't really control those things. But that having been said, we work for the system. A lot of this comes around the electronic health record. Everyone gets so upset about it. Yeah, but it's not for you. It's really not for your patient. It's for the system and the system of care. drives most of the variation in outcomes. The other piece we have to talk about is patient comorbidity, and that's why we're here today, perioperative medicine. So people ask me, as a liver transplant surgeon, why do you do perioperative medicine? Because that has an impact. As a surgeon, not so much so sure. I think that's where kind of we can win. So why did I say that? If I said that to a room full of surgeons, they get uncomfortable, and I've threatened their autonomy, and I called out their misgivings, and hopefully, they're going to resist my message a little bit, but they'll remember it. So I think it's intentional to understand, do you have credibility? And two is, what's the bias of the room? And you call them right out on it. Say, this is the problem. All right, third point is emotion. So I'll tell a story about my role in the opioid epidemic. So I run a program in Michigan. We have about 12 grants, and we have about 40 staff that has just really grown up over the past 2.5 years. And it all started with a day when I was on donor call. It's the worst part of my job. And I had 3 donors in a row. So I don't remember how I got there. We got there, first patient. We had this little moment of silence, and they read this little story about the donor. And we're standing there, and there's this 20-year-old girl on the table. And anyone who's done transplant, many of you probably experienced this. And the Teflon's up. You're not really thinking too much about it. But it was sports injury in college, opioid exposure, overdose. Literally brought the liver back for my partner, went out and did another one, wisdom tooth extraction, 18-year-old girl, overdose. The third one was a University of Michigan undergraduate who at a party experimented with opioids and alcohol, presumably for the first time, and overdosed on our campus. This was in about a 36-hour time. So this was probably 4 years ago, I guess. The opioid epidemic wasn't kind of cool, I guess. People weren't really talking about it. Some of my anesthesia colleagues were starting to talk about it at my own institution. I became very interested in this, and this has prompted a big movement in our state. We were number 3 in prescribing overall in the United States. We're down to about 10, a lot of because of the work that I think our team has done. But this is so how does this matter to me? Well, if you're a surgeon, so it's just Tony and I I'm talking to right now, we prescribe about 1/3 of the opioids in the United States, but we prescribe it between dentists and surgeons almost all of the opioids for people who are opioid naive. So if you've never had opioids before, you're most likely to get it from a surgeon or a dentist. And among those patients, the implications of that first exposure to opioids can be absolutely devastating. So, don't worry. So why does that matter? Because if you look at people who are opioid naive and you do a routine surgery, their new persistent opioid use rate is about 6%. Big operations, like what Tony does, it's about 10%. Breast cancer and reconstruction is almost 20%. In children, adolescents I should say, it's 5%. So what does that mean? That means a year after surgery, or 90 days after surgery, depending on the study, we've written about 8 or 9 papers on this, a large percent of patients continue to take opioids every day. Among those, about 10% develop true opioid use disorder, where they have essentially admissions for addiction or overdose. So almost every heroin addict, almost every person who's in the emergency room for an overdose got their initial prescription from a dentist or a surgeon. So we are part of this. And probably the most common surgical complication in the state of Michigan is taking an opioid naive patient and turning them into an chronic opioid user. So why did I tell you that story? That was an emotional story. And I'll tell you some of the effects we've had in the state of Michigan and why practice change has been so easy in this space, because it's an easy story that is relevant to every surgeon. And the dentists also have made some progress. So that's point 3 is essentially emotions. Point 4, and I think this is where most of us academics go wrong, is you need to show data that people care about. And community-based physicians, if you show them randomized trials, that is not my world. And I have this slide that I didn't put up, but it's essentially a bunch of people on a beautiful beach in like the south of Greece. But every surgeon thinks that's not relevant to them. Like this is the randomized trial study population. And then there's a picture of a guy who is like surfing in Lake Michigan. He has ice like down his. Every surgeon, every practitioner thinks, well, it's different where I practice. And the point is, it's context specific. you have to kind of demonstrate data. Just going through trial after trial is good for scientists, but if people practice medicine, they want to hear data that matters. So this is a great study, and this was, a medical student did the study. It's the number 2 impact study in the JAMA system in 2018. And it was done by a medical student. And all it was this, simple as it be. We looked at 400 patients who had a lap chole at University of Michigan, single institution study. And we basically said, how many pills did we give them? The number, on average, 46. Called every patient, 93% response rate. How many did you take? 6. Well, that's a big difference. Why don't we just give everyone 15 pills? We did that, and now at the University of Michigan, most patients don't take any opioids after a lap chole, but we give everyone 4 pills, and it changed kind of that quickly. So it is a simple story that every surgeon in the state of Michigan kind of say, we had a problem at our own institution. It's easy to explain. Sounds like it's an easy change. People care about it because lap chole is the second most common operation we do in our state. And most importantly, patient-reported outcomes remained, actually they got better. So then everyone always asked after that, how about wisdom tooth extraction? So who has had their wisdom teeth removed or have a child who has? It's about 80% of Americans get their wisdom teeth extracted. No one can really tell me why, but I'm not a dentist. But I've been spending a lot of time in the dental community. Everyone asks about, so we started to study wisdom tooth extraction. Turns out there is really good randomized trials that patients with ibuprofen and Tylenol around the clock do actually better than patients who get opioids after wisdom tooth extraction. But it turns out in the state of Michigan and nationally, 80% of people get opioids. So we wrote this paper about a year ago, I think. And in the United States, this is kind of a large database study. 78% of people get opioids. Of these adolescents and young adults, if you take your opioids, you're 2.7 times more likely to have new persistent opioid use. So what does that mean? From a population perspective, that's almost 1 million patients a year, adolescents, young adults, who become new chronic opioid users just because of wisdom tooth extraction. About 1% of them will overdose in that year. So the point is that this is data that people are interested in, and it brings people in emotionally into the problem you're trying to fix. All right, so then I'm almost done. I've told you you kind of have to bring credibility. It's good to have someone from the outside come in. I've kind of talked about the point that you need to kind of show data that people care about. You have to tie it to emotion. But I think the most important point, and this is kind of the same point that Carol said, in Michigan, we're all about care pathways. I don't think anyone should go through care without it being part of some pathway. And in kind of things like cardiac surgery, transplant surgery, it's kind of always that way. Emergency laparotomy, we're going to have to get our act together in the state of Michigan because we haven't done that yet. Our mortality rate's about 14%. So, because it's hard. Yes. So anyway, so pathways. So I actually brought my daughter here again. Let's all this. I don't bring her everywhere I go. But I have 3 children. My oldest and my youngest are with me here and in the hotel. My daughter's 15. She's, not here so I can embarrass her. She's the child my wife and I kind of worry about. She's quiet, studious. She apparently didn't speak, seemingly, from age like 12 to 14. In fact, on the flight here this morning, I woke her up at 4:45. She didn't speak to me until she voiced hunger around 10 o'clock this morning. So to graduate from 8th grade in her school, she had to do a talk, kind of like I'm doing right now, 20-minute talk, and like a capstone project talk. And we knew this was coming. In 5th grade, the only day of school she missed is the day she had to read some poem out loud to the class. She wouldn't go to school. We couldn't get her. So my wife and I are very worried about this. So long story short, she chooses the plastics in the waterways in Michigan. We live in Michigan. There's lots of water. Plastics are a big deal. And she asked me for help. And she and I go through and make slides, and we go through the data and 20-minute talk. And it was, I won't tear up, but you understand what I'm saying. Parents are just like, wow, she's talking to me, and she wants my help. And I got to appreciate her brilliance. She's like, just brilliant young woman. Made a slide. She gave the talk. I'm in the front row crying the entire time. She's rolling her eyes at me. So anyway, I am locked in emotionally around I am woke when it comes to plastics. We'll leave it at that, right? So the next day or a couple days later, I go to Starbucks and I get coffee, and I have a paper cup, and I'm like, oh wait, I can't put a plastic lid on it, right? And I don't even want to use the stirrer, so I'm a cream and sugar person, so I'm kind of going like this. I pour like 2/3 of the thing out, go in my car, put it in there, do that again the second time. But the third time I do this, I'm in the hospital, and I realize I can't really walk around without a lid on my coffee. So I had put the plastic lid on, and now I use a plastic lid every time. In fact, there's one right there, isn't there, Saul? Yeah. What is the point of this rant? The point of this rant is that despite the emotional tie of me and plastics, the really deep tie, I didn't change my behavior, and why is that? There's no pathway for change. You have to make it essentially totally easy to change your behavior. Starbucks has to figure out another way to deliver coffee. I'm not sure what it is, but I cannot not use plastics. So when it comes to getting people to change their practice, you have to tell them exactly what to do. Pathways aren't enough. Pathways, they have to say erythromycin, 1 gram PO, Q6 hours. It has to be very, very specific. And I think that's key. So in Michigan, so we're very fortunate. We have data flows from 70 hospitals. We have a data coordinating center. We know how people do. We know how many pills they're given. We know how many pills they take. We have an infrastructure for patient-reported outcomes. And with all of that, we can understand how many pills people take after common operations and peg it to the 80th percentile and set recommendations for our state. These are the numbers. So before we had recommendations in Michigan, the average patient got 160 pills after total knee. So it's now 50. Lap chole in Michigan was 38. It's now 10. The average patient takes 4. So this is proscriptive. You do surgery in Michigan. This is how many pills you should get. And this has worked really well, and I'll show you the data. I'm not talking about incentives, but the bottom line is we now have very significant incentives to follow this pathway in the state of Michigan, but the change happened before the incentives. So the way our program works in Michigan is Blue Cross essentially underpays every hospital by 10%. 10% of the money is at risk, and we're essentially the vendor, but we're the physicians in Michigan. That's a really important point. Nurses, doctors in Michigan, we decide how that 10% is given up. So that's the incentive payment, and it's all about driving change and improving care. It's a beautiful business model for the people in the state of Michigan. So we have care pathways. So that's this pathway for change. That is Starbucks changing the way they deliver their coffee. It's a specific, this is how you do a lap chole in Michigan. This is how you do colon surgery. And it's a proscriptive thing. We take the highest performing centers, we take evidence, we ask them, is this pathway good? We talk to people like Tony in colon surgery. He's like, here's the colon pathway in the state of Michigan. Combination of evidence, and we go to the 3 high performing sites. Can you edit this? Every site is given a specific pathway. It's very prescriptive. They can edit it as they see appropriate because there's variations in resources at different hospitals, but they have to follow it. They're paid based on how they follow it. We're going to do one in emergency surgical care. We started easy, so we started with lap chole. Colon surgery is pretty well worked out. Most people follow your ass by now. So this is opioid prescribing across the state of Michigan in the last year and a half. So on average, patients got 200 OMEs. That's in the top left, which is, I think, about 40 pills. And as of May, so just in about a year and a half, we were down to about 20 pills. Currently, we're down around about 11 pills. This is a statewide population, so it's 10 million people in the state of Michigan. I think as importantly, we're doing this as nurses and doctors. So things like pain scores, quality of life, patient regret about surgery, patient satisfaction have stayed stable. So I think the point of this is that these specific care pathways can be very impactful. Costs of surgery in the state of Michigan over the time period are down 13%. Nationally, they're up about 10%, and complications are down about 23%. Nationally, they're down about 10%. So costs are going down. That makes Blue Cross happy. So how many pneumonias do you need to not have to pay for this program? Not very many. Pneumonia costs about $60,000. Here's my final slide. I think when we think about improving perioperative care or anything, some of us think about data. Data kind of doesn't really work unless, maybe in this audience it would because we're kind of evidence-based. But for the people who actually practice medicine, the CRNAs, the surgical residents, it's just one small piece. You have to tie in emotion. Why should you care about this? Opioids is an easy sell, because in Michigan, it's just been such a devastating problem. But it's hard to kind of make that around other problems. But in emergency surgery is probably you could tell a good story about that. But you have to align all of this with the core pathway for care. And I think to really kind of change, you have to do all three in a very strategic way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael, and my lavalier works, so we'll go. We think about, I think, we want to strike people's emotions, but, when you're in there trying to get things done and trying to actually get these programs up and running, people are pushing the finances, they're pushing the data and all these other things, and so much of the emotion actually kind of gets lost out of it, I feel like. How did you, I know you said that the physicians were kind of an easier buy-in. When it came to the rest of the team, I know, again, striking in emotions, everybody wants to do that, but I still feel there's like a lot of parts that are kind of missed whenever you're trying to do that. So education and some of these other things about how to actually get it done, on the floor for a nurse, to make sure that they're not giving narcotics, when they, if they don't have, or if they have the option not to turn to that first. So did you do a lot of education, and who drove that, and how does that work, and how did the surgeons come into that picture?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a talk. Made it sound like it was,
No, yeah, for sure.
It's the grand impossible task. Just a little anecdote. The first group we really kind of started thinking about pain. I partner with this my anesthesia colleague Chad Brummett and this plastic surgeon Jen Walge, and the three of us said, all right, who are like the healthiest people we care for at our institution? Kidney donors. I'm a transplant surgeon, so easy. So we just kind of, figured out how we do pain care with kidney donors. Gave them 50 pills, by the way, and we sent them home on post-op day one. And not only that, but we kind of mapped it through, and it turns out 14 people. These are the healthiest people in our hospital. Kind of gave them education on their post-op pain, and of course, all of it was completely different, right? So we had to kind of re-educate 14 different, when I say 14 people, like different, different stakeholders.
Yeah.
Transplant surgeon, transplant CRNA, transplant nurse, anesthesiologist, take your pick. 14 people.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, one overnight stay among healthy, people with no medical problems. So the point is well taken. It takes a long time to kind of unlearn or develop new care pathways. In Michigan, we don't get prescriptive about how hospitals get it done. There's enough revenue at risk that most hospitals are pretty good at quality improvement. There are some very low resource hospitals in our state, and we try to focus more of our attention on helping them. In the high resource hospitals, we basically set up a template, and it was not just me, like some of the great hospitals, we asked them to kind of drive the process for the rest of us around the state. But we talk a lot about the squishy stuff to prevent burnout. We talk a lot about making Michigan a great place for surgery. We have two large universities, University of Michigan and Michigan State. Most of our surgeons and anesthesiologists went to school there. So we talk a lot about that part of it. And we celebrate our success. We fail most of the time, don't get me wrong. But we've been cranking at this for upwards of 15 years. So, it should be a good place for surgery. We spent a lot of money trying to make it better. So.
Yeah, it sounds like you have really great outcomes. Are you using the type of, the model that you did to roll out other quality improvement programs, and how is that going for you all?
Yeah, so we've gotten to a point where the easy stuff is we've squeezed most of the juice, so to speak. So we're really focused on patient experience, patient reported outcomes, and value. Mm-hmm. So there's one hospital actually that has a hard stop around things like smoking and obesity and diabetes. They will not operate on those patients because discretionary surgery like orthopedics, hernia surgery, things like that. So we're I don't know if we're quite ready for prime time. Telling surgeons not to operate is a tough one, but we're gonna, that's one of the hospitals came out with this. They're somewhat influenced by trying to hit appropriateness a little harder. But the care pathway is a proscriptive thing, and we throw in there lots of ideas from this group. So for the, we have one coming out soon in major abdominal surgery, pancreas surgery, and prehabilitation is a core part of that. For the colorectal patients, we do have prehabilitation, most enhanced recovery kind of type stuff. But the point is interesting. At my own institution, there were, I think, 39 surgeons that do laparoscopic cholecystectomy, and there were 50 different case cards on what nurses would have to pull for 39 surgeons. And the one slide I didn't show is Atul Gawande wrote this great paper that if you go to Cheesecake Factory in Durham, North Carolina, not that I have one there, but maybe Raleigh, North Carolina, or in Dallas, or in San Francisco, it's good service, same exact food, right? At the University of Michigan, apparently there's 39 different ways you can get your gallbladder removed. It's always in the right upper quadrant. So every surgeon has it's in the same place every time, pretty much. So the point is that, I can't speak to other specialties, but at least in surgery, there's a deep culture around autonomy. That's my thing, that's what I need. And we are trying to stamp that out. I think the gallbladder's in the same place. The tray should be the same. That saves millions of dollars at your institution if you can standardize those things. And the pathway should be the same. So we're not saying that across your hospital, my hospital, the pathway needs to be the same. It should be largely the same. But within a single institution, for the things that are commonly done, it needs to be done the same way. We're making progress on that, I hope.
Dr. Aronson has a question.
Mike, lovely. I always just thoroughly enjoy your prose. A question for you, challenging a little bit. First of all, let me just, before I do that, say I so very much feel, live, understand, viscerally connect with the idea that emotion drives change. We are living it, as you know, right now at Duke, as we try to advance that dial. That said, I'm asking you, and this is sort of a Carol Mike kind of question as well. Where in your triangular Venn diagram is patient, if you will, involvement and incent and commitment to their own betterment of care? And I ask it in the context of the incentive tax that you raised, that has been brought forward in the UK as a sort of a positive negative. We give people tickets for not putting on their seatbelts. At what point should that play in our change, if you will, paradigm?
Yeah, point well taken. I think actually his last name is Avedon. He's an anesthesiologist at University of Washington, or WashU. He gave a talk to us about 3 years ago on patient-reported outcomes, and we were like, oh my gosh, we have no patient voice in this entire endeavor. We don't, it's so innovative that you would actually ask the patients how they're doing after surgery, right? So we do have a robust, everyone gets 30-day and some 90-day follow-up on essentially the stuff that matters. Do you regret having surgery? Things like that. But I will say that's as far as we have gone. We have a lot of data, and we're not really sure what to do about the patient-reported outcomes, other than pain. Pain is easy. So as far as patient kind of owning some of this outcome, we take on faith every patient wants to get better. And that's where I think where preoperative stuff can be very impactful. It's around patient empowerment and positive psychology, going into the operation kind of with momentum in mind, body, and soul. We have worked to try to accomplish that. We have made that a reality at my own institution, but I'll talk tomorrow about our prehab trial, which essentially once the funding stopped and across the state, it just kind of stopped. I think prehabilitation, I don't really understand the physiology of it, but I think it can certainly engage patients and their families around kind of the perioperative journey. I don't know if I'm answering your question or I'm just ranting, Saul. But
no, I think it's good. Carol, what did you comment?
Well, just on a couple of things, and I think patients are absolutely central. In the emergency laparotomy audit, Sarah Hare, who's taken over as the national lead, she set up a patient involvement group, and there was an amazing feature on the report 2 years ago with a young woman on the front cover of the report, and who's become a real advocate for improving this care and also helping having difficult conversations. And I think we're seeing that with the Brain Health Initiative work that we'll talk about tomorrow. We're all worried about talking to patients about delirium, and the patients and their families are going, talk to us, we want to know about it. So again, I think it helps when you're in difficult areas to get the patient voice into the room.
Yeah, yes, you did answer, sort of. And I would say it's been a really complex journey for us to sort of tease it out. I'll use smoking cessation as an example. Most people who want to quit smoking have figured out how to quit smoking. Those that have not, I've learned from my colleague James Davis at Duke, are the ones that can't. There are some complexities of their personalities and physiology that just make that decision to quit very difficult. And so they need help. Just simply saying you should stop smoking because it's better for you and it'll help you heal better and recover faster isn't enough. And to our surprise, we thought there would be a teachable moment, sort of aha, and it isn't bearing out. And so I think there might need to be something else, albeit the example of the hospital that you talked about, whereby they won't do surgery unless they perform certain tasks, or an incentive tax, if you will, that Carol mentioned. I think there needs to be some other more objective motivator to induce patient behaviors above and beyond that. We know it's good for them, and they know it's good for them.
Lee does have a comment, but Lee, we're going to go through some Slidos real quick, and we'll get the mic over to you. Lee.
So some quick fire questions from Slido if we could. Terrific talk, so well done. Thank you. By limiting post-op opioids, have you seen changes in adverse outcomes yet? Is it too soon? When might data start to emerge?
Yeah, it's a great question. So overdoses in Michigan will be higher than ever. It's a really sad reality. The journey from exposure to opioids to overdose for most people is about 3 years. So the prescribing across the United States started going down about 2 years ago with primary care providers. Still has not gone down with surgeons, which is an unbelievable piece of data. We've obviously are making some progress in the state of Michigan, but when is this, like when am I going to stop doing so many darn transplants because of the opioid overdose, which by the way are up about 20% in the United States? It's probably going to be a couple more years. Overdoses continue to climb. Great question.
Most popular question voted to the top is, have you thought about using reusable coffee cups?
Yeah, it's funny because someone sent a bunch to my house anonymously after seeing this talk, and it might have been Saul, I don't know. And there's these rubber ones.
You can have one of our tin mugs there with top mid.
Yeah. Turns out they leak.
What are the top emotional hooks for one administration, 2 surgeons, 3 RNs, and 4 anesthesiologists?
Yeah. So administration, I think administration, we sell them short, and many of us kind of own administrative hats. They want to hear patient stories. They want to hear that appeals to them as much as kind of anyone. Surgeons are all about efficiency. Anesthesiologists are about collegiality, and we all have our tell. By the way, we have a collaborative in Michigan, an anesthesia collaborative that we partner with. We never would have done anything on opioids. They hadn't been like, you guys are idiots, why don't you guys do something on opioids? So, the tell. Nurses are absolutely key with respect to people who actually do the work to make the change. It's 90% nursing stuff. You need to have physician kind of saying okay, but the nurses do the lead. So we have most of the staff at our collaborative are nurses, experienced, credible nurses who drive most of this.
Are the surgery-specific pathways you discussed applied to just the system or statewide?
I'm sorry, Martin, can you say that?
Are the surgery-specific pathways just the system, or are they statewide?
Yeah, they're statewide. They're not fully kind of implemented, but we basically have kind of like a year of do it, and then we have a year where we measure process parts of it, and that links to some degree of incentive. I could talk about incentives all day. Incentives they can backfire. We've learned that lesson aggressively, particularly with surgeons and their relationship with kind of the pot of money that is the hospital. But so I say partially implemented. Nothing's going to be as easy as the opioid thing, though, and we know that.
we're running out of time. Did you track the number of patient post-op calls emanating from imperfect pain?
Yeah, great question. So I made a point that there's two things people kind of cared about. One was wisdom tooth extraction, so we wrote some papers on that. The other one was how many phone calls am I going to get? We've written 3 papers. So the only thing that the number of pills you give predicts is how many pills patients take. We've shown that in 2 different studies. Refill rates have actually gone down in the state of Michigan just because we've invested a lot of time in patient education expectation setting. Surgery hurts. The average patient takes 2 pills. We're going to give you 4. We'll call you the next day. That takes time, and that we still get pushed back, but that's kind of the best care, best pain care.
Lee, Professor Fleischer.
So, Lee Fleischer, great as always. And you talked about incentives. So if you look at all the behavioral economic work that Kevin Volp and others have come out with, it all works in the short term, doesn't work in the long term. And we talk about social determinants, but to solve, we're actually asking in some ways, the problem is their neighborhood, but we're turning that into, did you exercise? So my question is actually about trust. That if you look at a lot of surgeries, what we're seeing is what overrides what patients will choose is whether they trust the person that's actually caring for them. And particularly around racial differences, the old white men, you bring in an African-American female and you actually say, do you want to get breast reconstruction? They do it at lower rates than white women. So I'm wondering, how do we use trust and how do we rethink trust to get patients to maybe do this rather than using nudges and behavioral economics, which may work, but it's really short term, getting to your incentive.
Great question. There's a great article on trust in healthcare within the last, maybe you wrote it, within the last month or 2 in JAMA or New England Journal. And there's not a lot of it. Yeah, there's not a lot of trust. I have 3 comments. One is we have had some luck with incentives and they're very specific. So for example, for some of our pain pathways, surgeons can bill what we call modifier 22, which is an extra 35% on the surgeon fee.
Hey.
And then they're like, oh, then they pay attention, then that works. But only for a year, because it'll fade. So I think you can do big incentives for a short period of time to turn on a switch. What?
Surgeons.
For practitioners, yeah. For patients, great question. I think, and I sincerely do believe this, particularly in the context of big operations, I do think the surgeon has a primary role here to initiate the behavioral change. I think the surgeon has to say, I care for you, and best care is this. And so for example, in our thoracic surgical practice, they have more people they need to operate on, so you need to have that right, and they turn people away if they don't essentially prehab, they don't quit smoking, et cetera, et cetera. And 90% of people do it, 95% actually. So. But then how do you actually incentivize a patient? I don't have an answer. It's a great question. I think nurses have a role around, and we text patients every day. We give them a daily reminder, are you walking? Did you quit smoking? Daily kind of, on their phone. I don't know if that works or not, but we've tried everything. I think, as a surgeon, my surgeon-centric view is that we need to own forcibly. And we need, as a system, to not put patients at risk who are too high risk. And anesthesiologists will always agree with that. Like, if you weigh 420 pounds and you smoke and your diabetes is not under control, you are not a candidate for a total joint in the state of Michigan. And good hospitals are already doing that, but there's a lot of bad hospitals out there that aren't there yet.
So we're going to take one last question and break because it's from Mark and it was voted up to the top. Do you educate about the risks of developing dependency and addiction, and do you risk stratify from that perspective?
Yeah, great question. I'm not a pain doctor, so my partner Chad Brummett, I would ask him because the pain is really complicated, and we have focused on opioid naive patients for a reason. So I had never asked anyone an addiction history or a pain history in my life until about 2 years ago. I still forget pretty often. Where patients who have a history of addiction or chronic pain, it's a whole other can of worms, and we haven't even really done anything in the state for those patients. But we do encourage everyone to ask them for a history of addiction in their family and in themselves, and then when we have kind of a pathway for that. That having been said, my own institution, great hospital. Patient went to the OR within the last year with a piece of paper on their chest saying, I'm a former heroin addict, do not send me home with opioids. Told everyone in their care pathway, told their family and everything, yada, yada, yada. You know, they got discharged from the recovery room at like 9 o'clock at night, and with 50 pills, put in their little plastic bag. They got home the next morning and saw them there. So it's hard, even at, it's hard to drive change. And the patient, actually, I think might be suing our institution. And I think we're going to settle. We're going to say, you know what, we're wrong. You're right. And we're going to settle. So it's humbling.
So hold your applause for a second, please, folks. We'll be back in 15 minutes. I'm sure the break has truncated slightly to get us back on schedule. Please do enjoy a leg stretch, a bio break, etc. For those listening at home, we'll be back in 15. Round of applause.
This came off Michael. I was going to say, should we put it on Saul? Or the speaker? Oh, the speaker. Right. Yeah, the speaker. Yeah. You want to? Oh. Well, at least that we watched it. That's why we're going to put a lab on. Oh. Well, we do a lot of this. It's okay, but that's why I want to put. We're putting the lab on. Can you sit here with these on, like one of those on? Because some of the feedback, I think, seems like
So Mary had a little lamb. It was white as snow. And everywhere that Mary went, that lamb was sure to go. How are we doing with the sound bubbles? Sounds very echoey down here.
It sounds very, like, canny. Hey,
1,
Joel.
2, 3.
Joel. Hey, are you monitoring the feed? Can you tell us what it sounds like if we're getting back on it? Because it sounds really feedback and echoey up here.
Does it sound very loud back there? But down here it sounds very unpleasant to be speaking.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star. Oh, I wonder.
Does it sound echoey back there?
It sounds echoey. Jamie! Good. I'm good. Good. This is Monty Myden. Yeah. And this is Saul. Saul, this is Jamie. She's the CRNA I was telling you about that heard Top Med Talk and then started an ERAS program at her facility. Yeah. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. We'll catch up. Yes. Hey, girl. How's it going?
Hey, you dress up well.
No. Hey, girl. There's nothing.
That's too loud.
Sure.
Did they give you one? Okay, maybe they put it on.
Okay.
And that's not good.
My iPad is right here, and I have it on. should talk men talking now, that would be great.
But you have to sit on the couch.
Yeah, that's I can't. Mine's in my back.
Testing.
Doing it great.
Test. Testing 1 2 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2 1 2. This is input number 2. The Sennhauser. Testing 1 2 1 2. 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 Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2. Testing 1 2 1 2. Testing 1 2 1 2. Testing Testing 1 2 1 2.
Yeah, this is the one. Okay, cool. So there's your LCD settings for the monitor, eye sensor.
Ebpom USA meeting here in Dallas, Texas. Oh, I don't have a microphone. I'm so bad. That's my problem is that I can't stand still. I really can't. So welcome. Thank you guys so much for being here at the third Ebpom USA Master's Class Perioperative Practicum here on Baylor's medical campus. Thank you again to Mike Ramsey and his team for supporting us and hosting us here. We have a group here in the room, a full house, but we also have you guys listening at home. Again, thank you so much for listening. So before we get started, again, I just wanted to make sure that we are using the Slido.com Ebpom19 as your code to ask questions. You can start populating those as we go along, and we will address those once the presenters are finished. So again, without further ado, I'd like to present or introduce our next speaker, Dr. Elizabeth Chereau. Liz is a dear friend of ours at Ebpom, and we are excited to hear more about your experience in leading a large single group towards excellence. So please, everyone, a round of applause for Liz.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming back from SNAC. It's always nice to have a large group, and it's hard to follow Michael. After that, though, I think some of this will overlap. This is a relaxing, this is a hopefully slightly entertaining talk, and I'm hoping afterwards actually that it's a little interactive, and I might spur a little controversy. I'm an obstetrician gynecologist. Show of hands, how many obstetricians are in the room? Silence. So Michael, I gotcha, okay? So you had two surgeons. I almost raised my hand because as an obstetrician, I'm a surgeon, right? I'm an obstetrician and I see patients in the office. So I'm not an internist, never would claim to be. But I'm gonna talk about Axia Women's Health, which has formed back in 2017. I'm gonna go over a little bit of our history, who we are. And then I'm gonna dive right into a little bit of something that just happened actually within the last 6 months. But I'm going to start with a little teaser. I am presenting the ERAS program on Sunday for C-section. We've been doing that since 2016, so I'm not going to talk about ERAS. I am going to tell you how awesome the talk is and how Dr. Kett and I, who's anesthesia, partnered. So you need your partners. We started with a lot of data. We did a lot of collaboration, and we presented a pathway. Do you like how I'm leaning in, Michael? Got it? Like how I'm segueing right from his talk? And actually started an app for patients. Starting at 36 weeks so that they engaged in the process and followed them afterwards. And we actually have patient-generated data on satisfaction, breastfeeding, mood, all the things that none of you know a lot about because I'm the only obstetrician in the room, so that is always helpful. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about Axia. So yes, I flew in from New Jersey. And yes, you see the map over there. We are from north to south. We are care centers that are doing OBGYN at its roots. We also include, and I'm about exit 8, which is about middle of the state. You guys aren't laughing because you don't know New Jersey, so like silence in the room. And anyone who's live streaming from home in Axia is laughing hysterically because I thought that was going to be the funniest joke I had today. Okay, so Philadelphia, we're sort of an enclave, and you can see the sort of that knee area, that's where this sets in. There were two huge groups on both sides of the Delaware River that really were quality, like-minded in our sense of what our mission was, which was bettering healthcare for women. We merged together in 2017. And we're talking over 270 providers. We do maternal fetal medicine, high-risk obstetrics, as well as urogynecology, the P world. At least that's what I like to call it. I told you this is going to be fun. Reproductive endocrinology, so you're talking about infertility. We do breast imaging as well. And I'll get into some numbers afterwards if people want to know more detail, but that's who we are. We want to lead the way in improving women's health. We are actually the largest OBGYN group in the country. Right. But really our mission, which I can get into mission statements and leadership roles, but as our core team, Our mission became to create a more caring, connected, and progressive women's healthcare community. And I'm going to talk to that today specifically. I think there are lots of organizations out there that have mission statements that they necessarily put up and walk by every day or don't really talk to. But I want to give you a specific example today of what we've done. The first of sort of our values was to think about innovating and to embrace new ideas. So this is the American College of OBGYN. Again, none of you know them. This is their statement about opioid use and during pregnancy and abuse during pregnancy. So we talked about the naive patient, and I'm kind of like, Michael, I have that. Most of my patients are opioid naive, right? And how big of a crisis really is this? Well, I think the #1 heroin overdose is in Philadelphia. That's kind of around where I work. That being said, ACOG talks about 1 in 300, 1 out of 300 women after delivering actually gets addicted to opioids. On average, I'm delivering 250 babies a year. I'm very busy. That's a busy number. My particular care center does about 1,200 deliveries a year. So we are seeing this. So we as a group talked about how can we do what ACOG says or is recommending and screening our patients. And so as a core group, and this is a shout out to my clinical team, Dr. Steve Krell, a fantastic physician on the Pennsylvania side, said we need to start to do this, and how are we going to do this? ACOG recommended, their primary recommendation is to actually do a screening tool with a questionnaire. So there are 9-page questionnaires, 9-page questionnaires. You're a new OB pregnant patient. That is like you're not interested in answering that. You have questions about what to eat, what exactly are my appointments, do I exercise, what are you gonna do to me, what's the genetic screening, 9-page questionnaire. There is a 4-page questionnaire, it's not as valid. Could we do our own questionnaire? We literally went through all of these things, debating within our clinical team. So we went to our providers. We went to the 275, I said 70, so I may be off, but the 100 care centers across New Jersey and Pennsylvania, and we polled them. We literally sent out a survey, and we didn't survey just the lead doc in the group or one person. We screened everybody and asked for their input. SurveyMonkey is super cool, by the way. Anyway, and I'm not sponsored by anybody, I should say that first. So we went to them and said, here are the surveys, here's the ACOG article, take a look, what do you think, what do you want to do? And the feedback overwhelmingly was actually, let's do a urine screen. Simple, we collect urine anyway, we do a culture at the very first obstetrical visit. Why don't we do it? And Michael's wrinkling his brow back there thinking, so you didn't do this standard. We're not an academic institution which would have massive social workers to be able to department to refer to. We debated this within our team, and this is what we came up with. But we wanted to work as a team. We wanted to be open and honest about this as a choice. And we really wanted to connect with our patients as human beings and each other about this choice. So, terrible slide. So we wanted to have a pathway and I'm gonna talk, shout outs to different people on my clinical team. Megan Morton, one of our strong employees who works tirelessly and really set up within our EMR system about how do we schedule a patient, how do we get this done, who are we gonna do this to? So we decided to do new OB patients as they register. We wanted to inspire trust with the team that this pathway was set up. We always wanted to be respectful, so we didn't want to duplicate. If some care center was already doing this, we didn't want to duplicate this over and over again. And we really wanted to consent. We wanted consent on board before a patient had this and show some compassion for the patient. So here's our consent. Okay, this is a little better slide. So what you see is the different versions that we got to. And I can point out in the very beginning, they're a little different, but not so much. And of course, we had lawyers vet these, right? That's like the big kick. And one of my counterparts is actually an MD, JD, so super influential to look through this. And she had already been doing a lot of this, which was helpful. But we wanted to be honest with each other about how to do this. And fascinating to come find, the feedback we got from the doctors was, if you read this carefully with that fine print, that we actually wrote that ACOG, right, the Educational Foundation of our practice, recommends urine drug screening. I just told you they actually recommended a questionnaire. So we got a ton of pushback on this, and this was already in the EMR system, in little laptops, little tablets in all the offices. We had killed a few trees and Xeroxed some things. They weren't plastic, but we certainly were about to laminate them, and we were ready to go with this. And we said, fine, we need to take that out, because honestly, we need to be, right, we need to be accountable, and we needed to be honest about it. So we took it out. And then if you read this even further, it says, we will, if you are positive, we will send you to a maternal fetal medicine. So that's my shove you up the chain, please make sure this patient is okay for me to continue to take care of as a generalist. But again, there's recreational use of marijuana. And again, we can talk about this in the Q&A, and what exactly are those impacts? And does that mean that the one person who was positive at her first visit, her next visit is negative and says, I'm never doing it again, I have to send her to a high-risk doctor, so she's gonna have, and it might even be in my own care center, it might even be within my referral system, but is that an automatic? Lots of conversations with physicians who were debating this left and right. Of course, my MFM said, you will send this off. And my generalist said, I don't always do that. What do we do? So we again, we're ready to laminate, ready to be, right back into our computer system, which I think most of you know, getting into any kind of EMR system and changing was just fraught with a lot. So I'm gonna give another shout out to Megan Morton, who on a Friday night sat and redid every single one of these in our care centers. And I just told you there's over 100 care centers. And changed it to we may. But words are important, right? Words are become very important. And we wanted to do what we say we will do. And we, again, wanted to act with integrity. So here's our pathway. We actually have a patient when they first come in, they have to have a urine collection. We literally gave our lab exactly how to process the specimen, what we're actually sending it for marijuana to opioids, and there's a long list up here, and the details of it. And then what do we do with the results? We actually send it out to an outside lab to verify it. And you might say, oh, my goodness, that sounds like a lot of work. That sounds like, but for our patients, right, we wanted to serve with excellence. We wanted to set the highest standards, and we want to anticipate their needs. So we have a list for clinical follow-up. We actually had a joint conversation with, and I don't want to get into names of who they are, but we have a direct contact to an addiction specialist within New Jersey and Pennsylvania with a designated number for our providers. So it's that pathway that we're generating for patients and for providers to be taken care of immediately. And again, we really wanted to be able to do this by exceeding those expectations. So lastly, we wanted to value our patients, but we also wanted to value each other in this process. So we didn't just say, okay, we're gonna throw this out to 100 care centers and here we go, because we just figured out after doing the consent that maybe we should slow it down a little bit, right? So we vetted it in one trial in one care center. So in that care center we did, and again, I just got this actually from Megan this morning, that's my second shout out to her, that we had 145 in this one care center urine screenings, and there were actually 4 positives, 1 for morphine, 2 for opioids, and Darvon. I haven't seen Darvon in like, I don't know, I think I finished residency. Well, I'm not gonna tell you when I finished residency, but it was the 90s. And that's the last thing. I have a general surgeon who liked Darvon. So I haven't seen, I'm just picking on poor Michael. So that is sort of how, and let me tell you, this is a care center that turned around and said, oh, we don't have any opioid abuse in our care center. And I had physicians pushing back saying to me, as we started to enroll this, we're just not gonna see this. And some of that's the naivete, and some of them said, what script should I even be saying to patients about what to do? And this, this is a good story, right? This is the first one. We've, up to date, done 2,233 screens And we launched this, I should have said this in the beginning, February 11th. So what's it today, March something? And we had 43 positives, 28 were marijuana. I think that's expected. Or maybe I expected that. 5 were opiates, 4 I can't even pronounce this one, the Suboxone, that's what I like to say, sorry. 4 amphetamines, 1 barbiturate, and 1 benzo. And these are all newly pregnant patients. So you can imagine, I have 2 patients. I have a mom, right, and I have her baby. So we were very excited to be able to launch this. We thought this was absolutely part of what are our core values, which you might have heard me sort of slow down and say. But as an organization, and as a really large organization across 2 states, up and down, we've got, right, Sopranos, North Jersey, and Jersey Shore. I'll leave it at that, right? And then we're off to Philly. So we're culturally different, but at our base, at our platform, are really who we are. And I believe in them. And you might say, oh goodness, this lady's drinking the Kool-Aid. But I believe in this. I think we think through these, whether we verbalize it to each other or not. I think this is how we like to function and how we like to behave. So we put patients first. We inspire trust. We're always respectful and show compassion. We value each other. We're about each other as much as we care about our patients. And I would say my core team especially, who I've mentioned most of them tonight or today. We build community. Yes, we expand into care centers and we have become a bigger group, but we really do work as a team. We're very open and honest. I get pushback. I've been told to choose my words wisely once. I took that in stride. Sometimes that hurts a little, but we definitely push back. We give feedback to each other and we connect with each other as a human being. We're definitely accountable. We're honest with each other. We do, and I love this line, we do what we say we will do. I say that to my 14-year-old and 16-year-old who are not listening today. They should be in school. But I really like that because I think that speaks to who we are. We act with integrity and we try to serve with excellence. We set those high standards. We anticipate needs and exceed expectations. I think you could write this down as we put down pathways. And the last is we're trying to grow and improve. And you might say that urine screening may not be innovative, but we're certainly embracing a new idea. And the goal is to never stop improving. So I know you all think that this is rainbows and unicorns, right? Woo, yay, this lady's nuts, right? She's an obstetrician, it's all happy medicine. This is a lot of work. This is hard work. Sometimes I feel like I'm swimming with sharks and that I'm about to dive in. There's no question on that. And there are, I walk into a meeting of docs, there may be 1 at one care center, there may be 3, and I know they are like, what are you making me do? And actually, sometimes it's like herding cats. This is from Greece, actually, right? I mean, they're just all over the place. They don't pay attention. They don't come, sit, stay. No hand commands like you do with a dog. I'm a dog person. So there are days I definitely feel like I'm about to go up a big snowy hill, right? Or try and fly over the Andes, right? Or wherever these are, I have no idea. It's got this off the internet. It's super cool, but the copyright's all good, just so you know. I made sure of it. There's a super thing on Google, if you didn't know, that you can check that, so you can download pictures. And this is one too, and if you haven't seen National Geographic's Solo, I highly recommend. Many lives ago, when working for the Indian Health Service, I was a rock climber, different body, but so don't laugh that hard. Desiree. So anyway, the gentleman who won the Academy Award was a gentleman named Jimmy Chin, and he's videotaping a man solo climbing Yosemite, who you'll see in this one. And you're filming someone who might die. You're on the other side of that lens. And that movie, I could barely watch it. But this is a gentleman who, I don't ever feel like that. I have a team behind me. And this man has too. And I think, though, this solo climber, to a certain extent, felt like there was a team behind him. but it's not. He's by himself. There are no, and he climbs Yosemite without a rope, without anything, and he memorizes the entire pathway. And he does it over and over and over again, bringing in tons of data, right? Looking at all, and it's fascinating, but I don't want to ever be that. I love being in the team I'm in. I love being with the people I work with. Actually, I met with a doctor last night in another state that we're speaking to, and this woman was fabulous. She said to me, I sound cheesy, but I love my patients, I love my office, I love my partners, and that's kind of where I'm at. I don't mind diving in with the sharks or looking at the snowy peak that I have to get over, but a whole bunch of women rowing the boat forward, right? That's essentially what we're trying to do. And I just like they're all not like, super young fit rower, right? But that's the goal of what Axia is trying to do. And I like being on that team. So that's who I am. Certainly we have done enhanced recovery. I hope you all come to Sunday's talk because it certainly will tell you a lot of fun stuff that we're doing, and definitely innovative, definitely progressive, and absolutely caring. So that's it.
All right, I promise we are going to try and cut down on the feedback, so hopefully we've got it this time. So I'm going to hand this one to Liz. I'm going to turn this one over here.
Okay, I'm going to drink water.
Slide up. Ooh, that's a little loud.
I'll move over just a little.
No, I think it's me. It's not you, it's me, Liz.
I've been told that before.
Well, I'm so loud, it's so bad. I know I feel like I should join you on the couch up there, but thank you. That is a phenomenal presentation. Thank you so much for that.
Well, it's fun. I could have talked about ERAS. You're all going to hear about ERAS all weekend long. I thought I'd talk about something that we were successful at. We can certainly talk about the decision-making process. But as a young organization, we've only been around for 2 years. I think coming up with our mission statement, coming up with our core values, it really was part of the process. So I felt like sharing it. I certainly had my team log in from home. They had no idea what was being said today. They're probably all driving home thinking, yeah, she is kind of nuts, but they don't know that. And that has helped us do some amazing things. We do 18,000 deliveries. We do ERAS in several centers that have never done obstetrics. If you think about it, 1.3 million C-sections are done a year.
Yeah, we've had this conversation before. It's the biggest bed user
Yes.
in the hospital, right? So it's huge in the system.
Absolutely. And we cut our hospital, I'm giving all the punches, and Dr. Kett will kill me if I keep doing this, but our particular institution, we went from 3.7 days down to 2.1 for a hospital stay. Absolutely. Yeah, big time, right? So you think about that throughput for the hospital system itself, it was big. Yeah. And we've had great satisfaction outcomes and mobilizing patients, and we've decreased our opioid use by 87%. Michael talked about that prescription for 15. Over 60% of our patients go home with none. So we don't have a set, but we do have a shared decision-making process. Most of our patients are opioid naive, or I like to think they are, right? And most of them are. I mean, you look at that, but the process of we actually within our app come up with why we're giving you less or why we think you should have less, and it gives the patient sort of what their pain level is, how many, on average, what are they taking in the hospital, and what would they go home with, so they can see that map. And so I think we talked about being able to show patients that data, but really giving them an idea of what their expectation should be. And then we follow them kind of like Big Brother is what I like to think. So there is a third, I know I'm just babbling, Desiree, you don't even have to be up there, right?
Keep going, girl, it's good.
So American College of OBGYN talks about the third trimester and then a fourth trimester. And so right now, they talk about it. They don't know, they haven't been telling us how to do it. And so most of the time, I only have to follow a woman 6 weeks out from her delivery. They actually are now recommending that we follow people 6 months out, and looking at things like mood and breastfeeding, all of it. I mean, there's about 15 elements that they're recommending, but they don't give us a how. They give us a lot about why, but they don't give us any kind of how. So our app, which was super fun to put together, a lot of work, labor of love, as I like to call it, my passion project at times. And what it does is from every day, patient is pushed information or questions about what's going on and what expectations are, but also those questions are answered, and some of them are everything that would reflex to a phone call to the office, but I actually have a nurse who logs in and looks at it twice a day, and also alerts to let us know that maybe we need to be more attentive to that patient.
So when it came to your experience with leading your group and creating this change, I mean, I kind of see why you chose the opioid question, but what was it that really turned the corner for your group, especially for some of the laggards and those people that are you still struggling with those people, or?
Yes, and if they're listening. No, we had a lot of adoption, absolutely. I think I don't think the healthcare, the number one preventable healthcare crisis right now is opioids. We all know. I think everybody in the room probably knows it. I think most of us are believers. Yes, we had a lot of people who said, it's not going to be my patients. And one of the first phone calls I had, which I had to jump on with Dr. Krell, was a patient who was positive for morphine. And I had to jump on the call with the doctor, because the doctor said, I don't believe this is positive. And I think this patient, this is a false positive. And we flexed it out, and we all thought morphine in the urine, that's got to be short-lived. And was she just admitted to the hospital? I mean, we went through the whole kind of workup and thinking about it, and trying to be supportive of the physician who really thought, this woman, it's now in her chart. Is she going to lose her job? What are the implications of this whole thing? But we, not only supporting the patient, but the process, we actually had it checked by a third lab, and she was still positive. And her repeat was still positive. So there was a whole long conversation and an intervention, and that's when we really went, we better start partnering with some addiction specialists, besides maternal fetal medicine, for some of these patients, and realizing that, because MFM, a little overwhelmed, certainly knows how to do a lot of ultrasounds. I'm glad there's no MFM in the audience, because they like to do ultrasounds, and growth restriction and some of these issues that we have with real abuse, but what are we doing about the actual addiction? So we did a lot of partnering, but a lot of this turned around looking at what the crisis was, what can we do to change it, how can we be aligned with the patients. And this is voluntary, I should say. It's not mandated that you do it. Patients decline. We don't have that many that decline, but it is in your chart that you declined.
What's the conversation that you have with the patient?
I'll be honest, most patients, no problem. Sign me up. Yeah, pee in a cup. Next, I mean, they are okay with it. The patients that, in amphetamine, we had a lady on Adderall that wasn't really telling us she was on Adderall, so that conversation became, okay, what are you doing on Adderall? And is it your ADD? Okay, what do we need to do for you? And that conversation, should we get you into a geneticist and have a conversation about a medication that you've been on? My conversation starts with, this is what we do for all of our patients, it's standard. And we're taking care of you, and we're taking care of your baby. And the implications of that, they're big. This is a big deal. And it's fascinating to me how many people have just done it. So
Saul, I'm going to actually give you my mic since you're so close. And play.
Thank you. Goodness. So I loved your.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's me or the mic. I'm going to try to adjust here. I loved your statement about how difficult it is, how hard it is. You have 275, somewhere between 270 and 275 apparently.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you coalesce, if you will, attitude to do something? Walk us through that. How do you motivate? How do you communicate?
So, excellent question, actually. So I just finished, before walking in here today, something called the Provider Pulse. I'm very proud of that. That is just within Axia, we sent out to all providers. which I don't want to completely get, it's all about marijuana use in pregnancy. We drive that's driven by the clinical team on what topics to talk about, but that drives what we're doing and make sure that we're driving the same message. We do that not only with an office manager meetings, we have a town hall. So there's a whole team, right? They're not, it's not me telling you, you need to do this or that. This becomes sort of that global network. Because we, like the OR, there's a set of people beyond the surgeon. That's super important to make things happen. But we're big communicators across and try and be as transparent as we can. So as this came out and our survey came out, we announced the results of the survey. We then said, this is what we've all decided to do. And we're gonna row that boat. So now we went into the provider pulse. So I got to send that out. We then did a lead physician call. So 1 or 2 docs from every care center gets on the phone. That's usually a monthly phone call. It's led by our clinical team, and our CEO is on there, and our finance people. Everybody wants to hear all that, but the clinical stuff is what is driving us forward. And it's probably what we lock arm in arm in more than anything else as obstetricians. And originally, we came together because we wanted the price of speculums and pap smear stuff to be cheap. Let's be honest, right? I mean, I wanted economies of scale. There's no question there. And I say that joke all the time, but it's true. I mean, right? I mean, if you could all buy cheap, you're going to buy cheap. But we wanted quality, so we don't grab everybody in New Jersey, though it looks like it, and it's a super populated state. And we absolutely wanted like-minded people, but we communicate tremendously, and whether that's email, that's phone calls, there's office management, town hall meetings, it is. To the point, it can always be relentless, and this all started in September. I mean, it took us till February to get just a urine screen done. So, and choosing what we were going to test for, what we weren't going to test for, could we do within our lab, what do we need to verify, did we have to send all of our positives out, was that the right thing to do? That's the right thing to do.
So I'm going to push you a little bit. So
Yeah,
somewhere
I know.
between
I knew
the
it.
shark slide where somebody's trying to take a hunk of your, calf, and the all rowing together in the boat.
Sure.
There's a lot of gray.
There's tons of gray.
How do you manage through the gray?
So some of it is with an app called Calm, but some of it is, or Breathe on my Apple Watch. But you're absolutely right. It comes from, some of the pushback is great, and some of it's tough. I mean, some of it's really tough, and some of the people are mean, right? And I can name a few of them, but I won't here, though I'd like to, because that would make me feel better, but I'm not going to do that. Push me a little bit, I might. But you're right, it is okay, I'm swimming with sharks today, but the goal is that you're moving this in the direction of bettering women's health, and I truly believe in that mission. And I truly think that on a day-to-day process, if you are patient, and that's probably one of my big things. I know my 15-year-old isn't going to tell you, no way, she is not. But I think I have a lot of patience. I'm also very consistent. You have to stay on your message. And when I hear and I say, oh, they kind of have a lot to say, or they have some very good points, it's acknowledging that point. And maybe I'm a dog on a bone that will not let it go. And that's sometimes what you have to be. I also think if you're truly doing something right for patients, it's the right thing. And you know you're the right person in the room, right? And that, yeah, there takes a little bit of, I don't know, I could call that a lot of things, but I'll leave that alone. So I enjoy the challenge. The herding cat, the apathy probably bothers me more than the person who's pushing back. The person who's just like, whatever, and not doing it. We just talked about that. I'll call that care center and say, you're not doing any drug screens. What's up? And I may actually visit them. And then I may look at, you're collecting urine already, here's the consent. I made the pathway for you. So we did that literally yesterday. So yeah, I think that's part of probably who I am, that's all. Yeah.
Perfect.
Was that a good answer? I mean, Dr. Kent might say I'm a ball buster, but.
That's right. Do you want to do some Slido questions, Mark?
Yeah, so do you share with your patients the risk of their developing dependency and the ways with which they might mitigate?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there's no question on that. Actually, it's on our app. It's a verbiage that all of my providers use that are using our program, our enhanced recovery program. I think we have to. We actually in New Jersey have a box to check that says that I've actually told the patient that. So it's state law. So without question, we talk about dependence with all of our patients, especially if I have a patient who says, I'm going home with 15, 28, whatever, I don't believe this boohickey here, and it's that being patient with the patient and saying, no, I'm going to send you home with 5. You haven't, you've only taken, a couple here, you're going to go home with 5, and there are refills, and we have a way of following you. And you can come back to the office if you need to be assessed. So it's tough love.
Have you managed to reduce obstetrician autonomy? I think you probably take for that practitioner autonomy. Sort of thing I think was being referred to earlier, I'm guessing, is do they do as they're told now?
Well, there's certain practitioners never going to do what they're told, but no, listen.
And do you think it matters? Do you think autonomy is the enemy of?
No, I mean, I think Michael brought up because physicians love the autonomy, right? They do. They all have, there are about probably 20 different ways, 20 different cards doing hysterectomies. And I'm a surgeon who walks in and says, I'll use my partner's card, whatever's on it, just give it to me. And if there's something on there, I'll MacGyver it that I need. I'm an 80s kid, can I tell you, 70s early. But so what, so from my standpoint, I think there's no, C-sections are C-sections. There's a little bit of variation there. Okay, you want to use a different suture on your uterus, but really, it's a pretty easy, I should not say that, right? It's a surgery that I think we give surgeons enough autonomy as they need it, and it's plenty. But the rest of it, yeah, we took our variation of care, especially postpartum, and really streamlined it. And the cost of care we significantly reduced. But we also had such great outcomes with mobilization, with eating, with all the ERAS things, the decreasing, there was no way for anyone not to buy into that. Does that help?
What interventions took place for those patients who tested positive?
Interesting question. So I just talked about the patient that we actually referred to an addiction specialist right away. We have had long conversations, and it's why the provider pulse this week, which is a twice monthly publication that I do, is all about marijuana use in pregnancy. Because I'll be honest, I don't know. Recreational use versus whatever, greater than 50 states, it's now legalized. And people are using it for nausea, vomiting. What do you think pregnancy is? So we're seeing more and more of that. The questions then become, how much are you actually using? The deep dive into that patient's history starts. And again, is it an amphetamine because they're on a medication, Concerta? I had a patient on that the other day. I didn't realize that was an amphetamine. So that kind of referrals are happening left and right, but also looking at babies as well. The issue becomes which I thought somebody would ask me that. Maybe it's on our slide that I'm not seeing, but the referral in the hospital, right, is typhus. Right? Nobody's brought it up, but I'll just bring it up. Is that now I've got somebody who's positive, maybe I have a negative, and NICU's going to bag that baby to collect a urine. That's collecting a urine. Not. You guys are all anesthesia. You all went like this, right? I know. I can't believe I just said that. So collecting a urine, you actually do a bag specimen because it's kind of hard on a newborn. I know. You were thinking like heroin? What? Yeah. So obstetrician, we NICU. Anyway, so we collect urine specimens. So yes, the implications are this has just started. So what is going to happen with some of these moms? And I think we'll be doing a lot more on some of these babies. And right or wrong. Let's talk in a year.
Do you have any appropriateness pathways around hysterectomy or C-section? Do you have any appropriateness?
I don't know what an appropriateness pathway is.
Just what an appropriateness pathway.
We have an enhanced recovery for hysterectomy as well. So we have an app for that too.
Can you speak to marijuana use in pregnancy? Has state-by-state legislation affected your practice?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that and vaping, actually. Vaping, patients think vaping is perfectly safe. They don't think there's any nicotine involved at all. It's fascinating to me. And that conversation is, I certainly have gotten a lot of information about Juul and all the rest of it. That's a conversation I didn't know I needed to have, or I shouldn't say information I didn't realize I didn't know. And you don't know until you're sitting in front of a patient who's, 3, 4 times, 6 times a day is using electron, you're sort of like, what? I gotta learn about all this stuff. But yes, marijuana use, everything, nausea, vomiting, stress, right? They're using it for all these things. There's some, most people probably know better than I do for some of you. But from the standpoint of growth restriction for babies, you're talking about long-term child development. There's some of the attention deficit, more so than the hyperactive part of ADHD, have all been connected to marijuana use. And it's not recreational. What is, and the studies don't really tell you recreational versus somebody who's really using on a daily basis and using more than once a day. And we are seeing more and more of that as it's legal for medical use in New Jersey.
Last 2 questions. Can you please share your incidence of patients being opioid positive broken down generally by age group, by parity, by gestation age? That's a big question for hearing.
That's a huge question.
Is that a follow-up maybe?
Yeah, that's a follow-up. Talk to me next year. Or in 6 months, or maybe in London.
Any sense of where you're going with that?
So, I would definitely say you should know that the fastest rising patient population who are pregnant are between the age of 35 and 40. So we don't, well, that's national. So patients, so you might think more educated or older. No, I have a 48-year-old who's pregnant right now, and she was probably real good. So yeah.
Rising is a housewives. Or not housewives, but stay-at-home moms.
Last question. What was your practice for drug screens before you instituted the standard of screening all patients?
That's a great question. I probably should have started that. We had care centers that were doing urine screening. We had some that were doing questionnaires, but the questionnaire was not a standardized questionnaire. We had, and most care centers were doing nothing.
Great. So hold your applause again for a second. We're actually going to take a 3-minute break while we just sort out a couple of things here. So I'm going to turn off the live stream to home. We'll be back with you very, very shortly for our final speaker of this session, which will be absolutely fantastic, exciting close of this afternoon. So a big round of applause.
in recent years. Also a collaborator, which I think you'll hear about, in the relatively recently formed Morpheus Consortium, where the North Star Anesthesia Group, which Brian works with, part of the leadership team there, has formed a partnership with Duke University Medical Centre, University College London, and the University of Southampton to deliver an innovative new fellowship in therapy medicine. You're going to talk about a lot more than that, Brian, but please, welcome.
Thank you, Monty. It is an honor to be here with you guys, and I want to say thanks to Saul and Monty and Desiree for all the work you guys do in these conferences. It's an honor to be here. It's an honor for Ebpom to be here in Dallas, not only my hometown and where I live with my wife and kids, but also the town that I got to train in for anesthesia. So I did most of my training over at UT Southwestern and Parkland rotations, and then got to rotate here with Mike Ramsey and do some things and learn a lot about the real parts of life here. And then also got to be a patient here at one time. I think Mike actually did one of my surgeries one time, but we'll talk about that maybe later. But I want to say this, as I sit through the afternoon, it's been great hearing from Mike and from Liz and everybody about the processes. And one of the things that's a little bit interesting about the real nature of how these conferences go is you've got a lot of people that come and they're very honest. It's really hard to do what we're talking about doing. And so I want to encourage you to continue with courage. Do not come to these talks and listen to us who have got some war stories and some skins on the wall and some experiences that have been really difficult and take that as a reason to walk away and say, well, it's too hard, I don't think I can try. The moral of the story, and you'll hear it from every one of the speakers today, tomorrow, and Sunday, is you have to get in the game and you have to get in the fight. And you can't wait until it's all perfect, you've got to get started. And so you're going to hear some of those things in this talk here. I think the topic that was given was a multi-state, large national group pursuing excellence. I'm going to tell you a little bit about North Star's approach to how we handle this topic and how we're trying to accomplish it. I think the only real differences you're going to hear in some of the stories is we talk about it when we have to do it on scale. We have to do it in a commercial environment. We have to do it in a financially charged environment. So you're going to hear some of those tenets. As you listen to those things, I would encourage you to take away from that part. If you don't understand the financial tie to what it is you're trying to lead, change, or teach in your facility, you'll have significantly less impact. You must be able to speak to your surgeon colleagues, to your own colleagues, to your administrators. You must be able to speak to them from the realm of finance, because at the end of the day, and this will be a punchline at the end of the talk, it all comes down to the bottom line. If you want to get done what you want to get done, the reason you're in this room and having this conference, you must be able to connect those dots. So, with that, I'm going to jump ahead. This is the disclosure thing. I'm going to talk about some partnerships we have that were just mentioned. I'm going to talk a little bit about ePreop. I want you to be very clear. I often get accused is too strong, but people often say, you're so passionate about X, Y, or Z, you must be getting paid by those guys. And I want to be very clear, to date, myself nor any of the folks on our team have any financial relationships to any of the things that we're partnering with on this endeavor. So I just want to state that very clearly up front, and we'll cover some of those relationships here in just a minute. We're going to talk a little bit about North Star, who we are, give you a little bit of perspective on what we're dealing with in our company, a little bit of our history and some of the things that have affected our ability to do enhanced recovery and some of the changes that we've recently gone through. And then you're going to hear me talk a lot about data, not data in 14% and 82.3% and all that, but the importance and need of your data. I think there was a slide in here. There it is. Originally, I had this talk envisioned a little bit different and was going to involve several members of my team. To be very clear, if you're ever part of North Star, you're going to know it's never about one individual, period. It's always about the team. And for us, that comes in our relationships with our colleagues and our physicians, our relationships with our CRNAs, and our ability to work together. But my role today happens to be, I get to stand up here and tell you a little bit about our history. But in our company, the goal is always more important than the role. And so I'm honored to get up here and speak. But any of the, I think we have 30 or so folks from our team here from around the country, from I see West Virginia back here and Tennessee and Kentucky. Any of our folks could probably get up here and give this talk today, but I'm honored to do it and thankful that our team is here to participate. So here's a little bit of facts about North Star. We're a mega group or a big group. here's the timeline and the number of facilities and things that we've had across the bottom. We're currently operating in 20 states. You can see here where most of our case volume and revenue flows across these different states, mainly in Texas, Michigan, and Ohio. But then, of course, we're in all those other places. And you might be wondering, why in the world are you showing us facility counts? Because as big groups get bigger, there's a lot of different influences that come to bear on the group, on the leaders, on the people in the group, and the things that we're faced with doing. So I joined this company in 2007, over there when we had 9 facilities. We've got to go through a lot of different phases of growth. And then in 2013, we got to experience our first round of private equity. Now, it was a private equity round for just a very, very small number of people, myself not included. But what happened is you see this little section in the middle, 2013, 2017, you see a tremendous amount of growth, but it was a time that we were answering to a different driver and a different mentality for our group than maybe what we as clinicians want to be led by sometimes. And I'm being extremely transparent here, but sometimes the pressure for growth and numbers and financial returns and all those kind of things, when those things are pushed too hard, the mission of that growth comes ahead of the mission of other things. And I want to speak very clearly for us. You're going to hear in a minute, I met Monty the first time, I think, in 2015 and had a trip to London, and we got really excited about that, the vision of what we could do with perioperative medicine and enhanced recovery here at North Star. But we also hit that right about the peak of all of our contracts. If you're studying the graph curve, you might be going, well, what, y'all were big, now you're smaller. Let me speak very directly to that. Sometimes when you're growing, and you're growing for growth's sake, you grow to grow. But you don't grow because it's good business for yourself, your company, your team, or your patients. And so one of the big things that happened in our company in 2017 was we went through and did a right sizing, if you will, of our company. It was a very difficult season. It affected a lot of people. And those things are also forces that affect what's going on in healthcare in our world. But I wanted to highlight that to say one of the big things that happened after we got through that right sizing is we were blessed, and I mean that word in all the senses of whatever it means to you, to have a new capital partner come and be a part of us last year. And so we got what's called a long-term capital partner. It's in the form of a company called Cranemere. But instead of buying a company, hoping in 3 years it can go 3x, they can flip it, turn it, make the bottom right cell on a spreadsheet be really big, instead of doing that, this company that's invested in us has invested for the next 20 to 30 years. And so it has absolutely changed the paradigm by which we can talk about investments in enhanced recovery, technology, systems, leadership, training, the things that we have to have in order to advance the cause and to do our part with all of the things that you are trying to do here in the room. So you're going to hear a lot about that as we move forward, but this is a little bit about the size and scale of North Star. And when we're trying to solve for enhanced recovery, we've got to come up with things that do that. This is just a slide to show you that we've worked with a lot of people, been in a lot of different situations, worked with a lot of technical people. I always say this, but that doesn't mean we know more than anybody else. It just means we've had enough chance to screw it up with a lot of other people. And on that screen, you see for-profit, not-for-profit, small critical care access hospitals, large trauma centers. In our experience, what we've gained is experience. And what we're doing is learning from that and applying it to our future. I put this slide up here just because a lot of people, as I travel the country and get to meet with them, a lot of people have different beliefs about how these mega groups make money and how we actually do things. One of the things that we hear at North Star, we're fairly pro-team and pro-CRNA and pro-care team and so forth. One of the things we hear all the time is, y'all must come in, get a contract, fire all the doctors, hire a bunch of CRNAs, and that's how you make money. And I just want you to know, when it comes to the practice of anesthesia and trying to instill change, that's not actually true, never has been true about our company. In fact, you see here 4 different types of models, just very quickly so you know when you hear what we're talking about with enhanced recovery. 87% of our practice cases that we do every year are in a medically directed model with an average of 1 to 2.7 CRNAs being supervised by the physicians. But in our company, we do have all physician models. I think we have some of our docs here from some of those models out in Lubbock. And the only reason I bring that up is, 1, to disavow the disbelief, but 2, when you're employing and putting into new practices, policies, things you're going to do for the preparation, the care, and the delivery of patients, it's different in different models. So that's caused us to stretch and do things in a different way in different facilities and where we're practicing. Starting with the macro on the economics. I'm proud to be an American. I'm proud of all the things that we do. This curve has always been one that's really hard for us to figure out. We say we're the best and all those kind of things, but that one obviously is not sustainable. And we all know that. We know that's the macro driver here. But with one of those not being the same, one of the things that's come out over the last 6 to 7 years as we talk about all the advances in healthcare is we're supposed to solve this equation. And it's not just us that's supposed to solve this equation. It's the hospital administrators we're working with. It's the CEO who's afraid he's going to lose his job on a decision. It's the surgeons that are trying to solve these same equations for ourselves. And so one of the things that's in the premise of what we do at North Star is we believe that we have to help solve this part of the equation, but it's got to be done in the right way. The art of that is the real crux of what we're trying to solve here. But what I want to share with you is some of the philosophies by which we approach scaled deployment of ERP in North Star, and then explain to you how I think those things can be informative and hopefully helpful on our greater cause to help the most people in the long run. What's in a name? Semantics matter. That's been said many times today. Literally, these slides that I'm showing you right here, these are all often the same slides we're showing to our administrators and to our surgeons and to our other people that we're trying to get bought into the understanding of this. And there's a lot of confusion once you get outside of the circle of people that want to come to these conferences about what all this means. And so we walk through all of that. In North Star Anesthesia, we don't call it the perioperative surgical home. We don't call it any of those things. We actually call it the perioperative continuum. And I'll explain more about that in just a second. In the macro forces of healthcare, there's this whole trying to move from volume to value. There's a lot of different people out there trying to write prescriptions of how we bean count and turn in data and try to figure out what all of it is. Nobody has an answer for the value piece, but these are the major drivers, and all of you are facing those particular drives out there. The government is hoping in many different ways to try to solve and get that equation that we looked at before improved. We've got to increase the access and do more. We've got to increase the quality, but we've got to be able to somehow control that red line that's out of control. With this particular approach, bundle payments were in, then they were going to go away. Now they're talking about them coming back. And so there's ever changing the rules on the playing field. Your approach and your system for whatever you're doing in your group or your town or your academic center, all of those things have to be understood. But it's not just the government side payers that are trying to get all this under control. All of the other major private payers are also trying to say the same thing and do the same thing. You've seen the value of these things coming up, and for many of you in the room, maybe like us at North Star, we're beginning to have those negotiated conversations with those private payers to say, how do we control cost in the long run by maximizing the value that we get for providing you value in your care? And so it doesn't matter which part of the country you're in right now, all of the payers and all of the pressures in healthcare are trying to get this solved. And so we believe we've got to be a part of trying to solve that equation for them. As we go around the country, because of our size and the number of places we get to go work with, we found that there's an evolution of different drivers for what health systems and health partners are looking for right now. And it typically starts down here on the bottom. We get invited into a town or we get invited into a health system conversation, and the number one thing that most hospitals say is, we love you, they're awesome, they do great clinical care, that's all good, we just need you to save us some money. Right? And so it's a really hard driving thing, but most hospitals start here. The next step of evolution is a health system says, not only do we want you to turn off our immediate subsidy costs, but we would like you to actually, can you help us standardize systems, reduce waste, and get those things under control? This is your first leverage for negotiating value. If you can help with that, then that's possible. The next step of evolution is there's actually measurement and dashboards, and they've got some reporting systems, they've got data, and they're actually using that data to affect the care that we're delivering and helping to hold down that cost. The next evolution is some hospitals, very few, are finally at the point where they're talking about what is the outcome of our patient experiences and our patient processes. Very few health systems are at that level, but where we believe everything is headed is population health in the perioperative space. And I know that's a simple concept now, but 2 or 3 years ago, that was not the way many people were talking. And so what we did is we built our model to say, how do we start solving for population health, large-scale numbers of insured bodies or covered bodies in health systems in order to try to help with our scale and the economy of what we do in our delivery. So for us, these are the 4 keys that we think must be instilled into a system or a team in order to affect change on the perioperative system level or the perioperative continuum. To get from where we are today to where we need to be, we think there has to be a change in the way that we approach management style. We think there has to be a change in the science, much of which we talk about in these conferences here. 3, there has to be a change in the technological approach to what we're doing. I think this is one of the things on scale that's going to be most helpful over the course of time of solving, well, we didn't get the results we were looking for, we weren't just real sure, it didn't really work out, our funding only lasted so long, and therefore it stopped. I think technology is a place that we're going to have to lean, and we'll show you that in a minute. And then 4, we believe you got to have the right cultural attitude and be willing to lead cultural change, not just lead science and technology changes. And so for us, those are the 4 keys. I'm just going to unpack those really quick. Great quote by Bernard Shaw. It's important, but you can't change anything unless you can do it yourself. And then you can start asking other people to do it. And so important. Very quickly, just going to talk you through our management style. You've seen this in many forms, and it's part of the conversation around the perioperative home, but at North Star, we teach and encourage our teams to think about our role being more of the perioperative style physician, not just considering what's going on in what we call phase 4, putting patients to sleep and waking them up, but we need to get involved informatically with patient engagement and patient strategies at the time of operative decision, and in some cases before that, through these 7 phases, which all of you in the room know, all the way through 90 days post-discharge. And our process, our operational playbook is always focused on how do we affect patient experience and patient outcome as we go through that continuum. In our playbook, in each of these phases, we know and have learned there are systems and plays and processes that we can run that help patient experience and outcome. There's a large number of those that when you run them well, they actually affect the hospital's bottom line, which affects your relationship with them to have further conversations. But what we've also learned is between pre, intra, and post-operative systems and all of the various health system logos that you saw before, it's a tremendous amount of beating to deal with all the technological processes out there. Interoperability is talked about all the time. It is nowhere near current state. And so what we've done is had to work with technological partners to try to get around these limitations in that particular process. This is our management philosophy. To that, we've also got to add the science. Now, everybody here knows where that came from, and I met Monty in a place in Detroit early 2015 and started learning that, wait, there's actually data and stuff that proves, and first got that bug of hope that we could actually do something with the science. Later that year, we actually traveled to London and spent some time and went and traveled and started talking to people that were actually feeding them in the PACU. And this young lady in the chair is over here playing Sudoku, but she had a right hemicolectomy the afternoon before, right? And this totally blew our mind when we started seeing evidence of what the science and the change and all the great things that happened in the initial years of this particular program there. But we brought all of the science back here and we started trying to figure out how we could implement it on scale for our processes. And what we figured out, it's really hard. It's really hard, right? It's really hard to do it once, much less talk about doing it across 143 different facilities at one time. And so from the science, I'm not going to spend any more time on that. I do want to spend just a second on technology. This is just a very quick snapshot of our particular company and all the different sectors of what we do in the company and the multiple electronic systems that we have in one company. And for us, we had to go through a large burst of energy just to get our own information inside of our own facilities and our own teams figured out. What we figured out first was our clinical billing and quality data was a significant portion of what we needed to accomplish when it came to this particular conversation. And so we started partnering with companies, namely ePreOut. And so I'm going to just put this up here for just a second, but this is our approach to trying to solve on a macro scale all of the different inputs that are needed. I started out my career in the early 2000s believing that AIMS, or the system that we do in the operating room, was going to be the solution for all of this. And what I learned as we grew and we scaled and we started realizing there's 15,000 AIMS and you don't get to pick which one you want, we had to have a different process by which we could sample quality data. And so for us, we started sipping most of that data in the post-recovery period there in phase 5 for us and doing it through an Anesthesia Valet app that allows us to report quality and data at that point. Since that point, we deployed all of that in 2016 for the first time and got that enterprise-wide. We have since been working on our informatic portals and our connectivity for all of the billing processes that you have to go through, all of the clinical things that have to be accomplished here, and then all the quality reporting that you have to do post-fact. It is my hope, and I'm putting it on hope because I don't have definitive data to represent that all of this is possible, but it is my hope that as we build systems that are looking at the same data points on every single anesthetic delivered by a team of over 2,600 people on a regular basis,
that as we start learning more from the studies that Liz is doing or that Mike's doing or other things, we'll know exactly which variables to tweak, but we'll already have a Petri dish and a milieu where we can actually go play and tweak it and then see it move on scale. And so for us, this has become our approach and what we're trying to solve to get our data and to accomplish those 3 particular goals. Finally, I don't think I need to spend too much time on this, but if you're not capable and aware that you need to go lead conversations and, in fact, direct change with each of the groups here, results are not possible for you. If you want to just change yourself, that's easy. If you want to go change your colleague who actually works with you as a partner, that's easy. Go start talking to the PACU nurses, and go start talking to the pre-op nurses, and go start talking to the surgeons' office managers who actually put in all the orders for them and actually trying to train them how to do medicine. It's a really, really hard task. But if you're not committed to doing that and then trying to bring all those people to the middle, you're going to have a really hard result. So very quickly, 5 key takeaways, lessons learned as we've tried to start going around the scale. 1, great can be the enemy of good. This is raising my hand personally, and my team's probably snickering at me, but I've always got grandiose and big visions, but at the end of the day, you don't have time to go build the Taj Mahal, as some of my guys say. You got to just get after it and get started. And so for us, getting started meant starting at Tenet Healthcare and going to the DMC and just getting a program around orthopedics kicked off and get our first set of data. And that, thankfully, we were able to do that at the end of 2016. Number 2, when you've done one, you've done one. Despite being all under the same brand and we all wear the same logo on our shirt and we all believe the same things and we try to adhere to some of those principles I just told you, it doesn't matter, because when you've done one, you've done one. And you got to take all the principles and go apply them in a different way in a different town. I'll tell you about that in a minute. 3, this is Bob Booth's quote, "It ain't clean. It's like mud wrestling. You wish you could come give a nice talk. All the people would come down to the front after the sermon. Everybody be on a spiritual high. You'd go back to the hospital and everybody be marching in step and no, right? You open it, most people shrug you off, and then you get in the mud and you wrestle out all the details for a long period of time. Number 4, leadership is still the number 1 ingredient. Period, end of story. If you don't have it, you need to go get it. If you can't find it, it's going to be really hard. And so for us, I'm going to talk to you about what we're doing on that. And then, as I said earlier, it always comes down to the bottom line. 2018 for us, just getting started, as we did the reset with Crane Mirror and all the things that I was talking about earlier, is just go assess where we at. All the 150-something places that we're at right now. And when we did our sample, I was pleased, honestly, to see that we had 51% of all of our facilities either engaged or actively engaged in some sort of enhanced recovery in our programs. That didn't mean that everybody was publishing papers and doing all that. And to be very honest, of those, all of the 51, I guess, or 55, no, 58, I only had 4 that were actually documented on protocols, doing the whole thing, had the data, and had some type of reporting on the backside. But that's 4, and that's better than where we thought we were going to be. But we began moving forward from there. We then, across those surveys, you'll see these are the different types of service lines and the approaches. By far and away, the most engagement we had was from orthopedics. But you can see these service lines that we had coming into Q3 of 2018 across there. Incorporating the protocols, you've got to build the tools and you've got to have the systems. I totally understand at an individual level, it's much harder to get those things accomplished. But what we thought going into it was, we'll write a protocol. We'll email protocol to all people. All people will take protocol and put it into place. And it's absolutely not possible, right? And we learned that very, very quickly. Local law always prevails. Jim's part of the talk was going to be right here, and he's going to talk about Lubbock, Texas, and John Furby and all the great things that they're doing out there. But at the end of the day, if you can't adjust your principles and your means to get to your results, you're going to have a hard time trying to do it on this scale. I'm going to skip this slide just in the interest of time, and I want to move on to this particular topic of leadership. We recognize we've got great leaders. I'm so proud of the physicians and CRNAs that are in this room and the ones that are around the country that couldn't be here this weekend. I believe we have the greatest team of all leaders in all the groups. I'm only the 4th largest anesthesia group in the country, but I would put our leadership team up against anybody in any of the other major companies. But we also know that's not enough. And so through relationship with Monty and Saul and Mike and some others, we've been talking for a couple years now, but we finally just about 2 months ago inked the final contracts on the ability to start the first Morpheus Fellowship for perioperative management and an anesthesia management fellowship from here. It's going to be a great endeavor. We're going to kick it off this fall. We've modified a few things. We're going to kick it off with 6 of our current leaders to try to do the pilot year. So we're going to have 3 of our current national CMOs and then 3 local regional leaders be involved in that particular program. I think I'm going to go ahead and say this. It's currently, first year iteration and pilot, going to be a physician-only program. North Star has other intents down the road with that, and I'll leave it at that. But it's really important to us that we pour the right leadership and training on the science, the culture, and the technology, and all the things that you have to know in order to execute these programs. We get that into as many folks as we can. Very excited about all the partnership and our continued participation here at Ebpom. But without the leaders that you need in these programs, it's going to be really difficult. If any of you have interest in being a part of a fellowship like this or a phase of your life or career where something like this might be interesting, please come see me or any of the other CMOs that are here with us from North Star. And then finally, it all comes down to the bottom line. And so I would encourage all of you, if you don't understand the basic economics of what's going on in your contract and your approach and your negotiations with your facility, you need to learn what the 4 basic buckets of value are in the process of negotiating any deal related to anesthesia. There's 2 sources of revenue in our world. There's 2 sources of expenses. The expenses, of course, are all of us, right? Supply and demand curve is in our favor. There's not enough of us around the world right now, and so job and pay and all that's available, right? At the end of the day, there has to be overhead fees at North Star. They call that management fees. But in your own group or your own practice, it's how you guys pay for your med mal and your credentialing and all those kind of things. But if you don't understand, you're going to propose something, and if it affects one of those 2 things, you've got to understand how you've got to go to the table and negotiate that. One of the things that's the most glorious thing for those of us in anesthesia is we've been a double income, double revenue business for the last 30 plus years. If you don't understand the variable of what subsidy and the hospital's expectations for that cost variable are and how they view that variable, and you go in talking about wanting to raise the expenses on anything, and you can't solve for their value equation there, you will not get something done. It's one of the lessons we've had to learn on scale. But I don't say that to say anything other than if you can't tie it to the bottom line, your chances of success are going to go way down. And so in every part of your business, your group, your practice, whatever that is, learn the financial portions of your business so that you have a better chance to accomplish the outcomes for patients that you're looking for. Those are the 5 lessons learned. Those are just a few quick tidbits about some of the things we think about from North Star. But we think that if we can affect change on these 4 things, we might contribute to the betterment of what we're trying to do for patient care overall. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Brian, come and enjoy the sofa. We're doing the 1 microphone technique now. We're down to that stage. Yeah, we've worked our way down from 3 lavaliers and 2 handheld mics to 1 of these, but we'll get through it. Great talk. Thank you very much indeed. I want to take you back, which we referred to multiple times today, to the autonomy question. And in that, I want to deal with, enhanced recovery, we know is pathways and then compliance with the pathways. So when people look for the secret sauce, the only thing they seem to conclude is you need greater than 80% compliance with described pathways to move the needle, whereas what the natural energy in any system is you get about 60% compliance. Can you fix that, and can you fix it with threats, money, love? How do you? What's the answer?
Yeah, well, it's a great point, and anytime there's a challenge to individual autonomy, you've got to have answers. And in our particular model and in our approach, it's all about trying to get the right teammates or the right providers on your team, physicians and CRNAs in our world, that are going to buy into the fact that we're trying to do something other than just remain autonomous. If your autonomy has proof and it has data, then we're supportive of that. But in our culture and in our approach, the goal is more important than the role, which means the bigger picture is more important than you as the individual. And so we try to establish a culture where you recognize that unless it's provable, it's probably not defensible. And if it's not provable and we can prove it, that there's a better chance with the compliance to a protocol or other types of things, we put it on them to prove to us why their way needs to be better. But we definitely start with, it's kind of an Air Force thing, but a service before self. We try to minimize the role of individuals without reducing the opportunity for a physician or a CRNA to not have direct input into the decisions and the medical care that they're delivering. It's an extremely difficult thing, and I come back to the prior point. It's all about the data. If you can't measure the data and you can't report individually, and I'll state very transparently, I just had meetings this Monday to take all of that e-pre-out data that we're talking about and be able to break that down to individual monthly scorecards so we can start measuring people to their individual performance on the quality indicators that we're tracking. And so we talk about it. We're still evolving to get there, but that's how we think we're going to do it.
Can you expand a little bit more on those quality indicators? Is there a sort of minimum data set that you can?
Yeah. There's two parts to our world when it comes to quality and data reporting. The first part of it is primarily built by Rick, wherever he is, Rick Dutton. So we actually follow most of the direct measures with the AQI, the Anesthesia Quality Institute, and we report through our QCDR the same type of data so that we can report and normalize, and then also in future years, quantitate against that. The second group of quality indicators we have in our contracts and how we operate our arrangements with our clients, the hospitals and the ASCs, is at every single facility we have anywhere between 6 and 10 direct quality measures. The difference here is I can't normalize across the entire enterprise, but I can normalize physicians and CRNAs against the local performance at that local level. And so, and for the people that are in the room that work with us, those results, we've not been really good recently at sharing even back to our own people, which is why I'm a big believer in personal primary accountability. I think we're all competitive. We all got into this business to help people, but our competitive nature is if you show me something that I could get better at or that I obviously can do differently, most of us are wired to the point where we're going to do that. And so that's what we're striving to do, is to take those two quality sets of data and give them back to our providers monthly so we can watch their performance.
And the idea that each element that you might comply with has a monetary value. So let's imagine there's a 20-step pathway, and each component of the pathway is worth 5% of your total remuneration. Because, I mean, someone comes around to my house to do some work, they cut half the lawn, I'm paying them half. Actually, I'm firing them, if you see what I mean. Because I don't want a half-cut lawn. But I'm certainly not paying them for the whole lawn to be cut. And if my taxi driver drops me off halfway there, I'm not paying them for the whole journey. What's wrong with that approach?
I don't think there's anything wrong with that approach, first of all. To be very direct, we have some incentive metrics and incentive pay for each of our physicians and in our CRNAs in the equation. For everybody that works with me, I don't think that they're at high enough values that they actually change human behavior. Personally, that's just a personal opinion. We have them on theory and we have them in place, but at the end of the day, because we all make such good money and salaries for what we do, the amount that we have at risk or in the game, I think is probably not high enough to actually change real human decision making and what we're doing for compliance. That's something that we all need to talk about and work on. But at the end of the day, this is the broader macro movement. They're trying to make to where payment doesn't happen unless there's proven at least standard value. And then, the whole game with MIPS and MACRA is trying to get into the plus money if you actually can prove that you're performing better than the average standard deviation in the nation. So I'm not sure if I answered your direct question, but philosophically I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying. And at North Star, we know that this has to be part of the equation for how we solve things moving forward. But it's not going to be easy because it is going to be a change from how we all get paid very nicely to do whatever it is we've been doing in any way that we've been doing it.
No. I'm actually going to make some comments to sort of reiterate and emphasize what I think you said. By the way, you said it much nicer than I can imagine I will. One comment, and I sort of came up with this a few years ago, and I think I stole it from Mike, but I always say between data or science, as you put it, and change is reality. And so what I've learned from this afternoon's wonderful speakers is reality is a combination of emotion and trust and easy to do and incentives. And I think that's the reality that we're also invested in figuring out how to move, and it's very, very hard. And I think the theme of all four lectures this afternoon have touched on that eloquently. The other comment that I'd like to add is to Monty's point about paying the guy who's mowing his lawn half when they only mow half the lawn. We're the people with the lawnmowers, and the people who are going to choose to pay us are the people who are going to have expectations for outcomes, particularly in a evolving total cost of care, two-sided risk healthcare environment. And that's where we're moving everybody. So we're the people pushing the lawnmower, and we're the ones who are at jeopardy to not get paid if we don't do a good job.
I just, I think that's right. One of the things that is so true is, I'm a person of driven by beliefs, and in your gut, you have to believe that even though there's not answers and it's hard and it's difficult, you've got to believe that if we keep moving in this direction, there's a chance that we have something that's better on the other side. And so I would take that, the unicorn slide and all that kind of stuff, and you kind of live off of that if you're wired humanly. But I would also flip that to the pragmatic. If you keep pushing in this direction and you keep fighting in the game and you keep trying to get the data and you're trying to prove that you're doing the right thing, right? It's courageous to do the right thing even when it's hard. It's also the best way to sustain what you currently know as present income. In anesthesia, the pressures of downward reimbursement are going to continue. Hospitals will want to spend less subsidy. Payers are going to want to pay us less for the units and rates for what we do. That is a truth. And so I would encourage you to think, I hope you're wanting to do all of this for the right reasons and the right feel-good emotions, but I'd also tell you it's probably one of the most pragmatic ways you can try to fight and hold on to the really nice payments that we've all been able to make for the last several decades in our particular field. And so I would encourage you in that. And that follow-up comment here?
Of course. One more comment. Your slide, your simple sort of cost and revenue slide, I would ask that we all heed that and add to the cost side something that we, I think, have done a terrible job at doing in healthcare in general, in perioperative medicine in particular, and that is the cost of investment in our future. And I think we need to do that. I think we've been victims of our own success for too long. I think we have been taking advantage of a artificial world, and I think any good corporation, any good business will set aside some money in a Skunk Works program, if you will, or just for innovation and research and development. And clearly, obviously, those of us who live in academics, and I know many of us do not, there's also a cost of doing good science. And so this will not become easier if we don't I guess motivate ourselves to change our behaviors.
That's right. I would go back to my first slide, and I'll tell you, I've been doing this role for this company for just past 12 years now, and as of January 1st this year, it is the first time I was given any designation of a budgetary amount to apply towards research and development and push in this particular direction. And so as difficult as it is to work with large private equity firms and all those kind of things, I do want to applaud the one that we're currently with. It's the first time they're willing to make those types of investments for what may not pay off in 2 or 3 years, but if we continue on the journey at year 5 or year 6, we might be at that threshold to where we start to see the returns on what we're trying to accomplish here.
This is a great conversation. Do you have anything else, or do you want to go to Slido?
I want to go back to Sol for 1 second about this is sort of overlaps between what we call academics in the United States of America and the non-academic centres. So do you think there's enough financial awareness in practitioners who work in so-called academic institutions? Not in the National Health Service for the last 10 or 15 years, we've routinely discussed the money, if you see what I mean. So we go to our monthly meetings and we put how much we're spending on drugs up on the wall, and we put our ins and I's and O's, and we see spreadsheets, and we kind of start to understand the money. Does that happen in academics here, or is it just if you choose to do an MBA?
Well, goodness, complex question. I would say I don't know. I think we're becoming more sensitive to those realities. I think it's becoming more a part of our day-to-day dialogue. I would add, traditionally, it struck me as very interesting, particularly within my colleagues of academic, providers, the level of conscious naivete that they almost, were comfortable having, and sometimes they would just sort of revel in their lack of knowledge of that. I think that's evolving. I think that's changing. I think the whole litmus test of where we are is being moved by the evolution of value into care. That said, I would add that there's, on the other hand, I thought you were going to ask the question through the other perspective, through another lens, which is within Duke Anesthesiology, we also have a community division. Some of my colleagues in that division are here with us today. They're private practicing physicians, and they have accepted and have provided significant contributions to help, if you will, push the needle in the academic mission. And so I think there's a great need of sensitivity both on the side of the academic to understand what dollars and cents are going to mean to our future. And similarly, I think there is a need of our colleagues in the community and private world to appreciate the importance of pushing the needle from academics. We need each other. And I think we have to understand that better.
All right. So we have just a couple questions. We're going to be finishing up here very shortly. What resources do your platforms request from you, and what do you provide that is most effective in starting enhanced recovery programs?
So I think, first of all, on the resources, the conversation normally starts with either someone at administration or surgery that already has kind of caught the bug and knows how to have this conversation, and we get invited in to come partner with them. So that's probably the one type of request. What do we provide that's most effective? I think it goes to an earlier situation because of our scale, because we've got 30 great leaders in here who invest in time and things like that. When it's time to go to, Owensboro, Kentucky, and go solve what's going on there, we don't have to just hope that those people figure it out all on their own. We get to bring in resources who have been through the fight, been through the journey, have the decks, have the talks, have the protocols as a starting point. Not because we're going to come force exactly what we've done somewhere else on that particular facility, but the resource and the talent that we have to be able to come and kind of self-consult for what's needed in that town. I think it's probably the greatest resource we have based on our scale.
Gotcha. And is there a service line that is typically easier to start in the care start the care continuum with? Our orthosurgeons care about turnover times and if they can give Kevsol.
So let me turn that into a positive answer. Because orthopedic surgeons only care about turnover times and what antibiotic they're going to give or not, it's often a good starting point. I didn't give the whole speech, but listen, if you don't know this trick, when you're trying to solve for the culture of multiple different groups, your first question must be, what can I say is in this for them? And if you can't answer that and you just go to the table with what's in it for you or what's in it for your patient, that's beautiful and that's missional and all that stuff. That's not human economics. You can't get something without bringing something to the table for them. And so orthopedics, I do think, are extremely interested in this because, A, it's a lucrative specialty, and the better efficiencies they have, the better money that they make. We can take the stance that that's wrong and they should have better values and they should think and believe like we do. Or you can take that as an opportunity and go make it work for them to get it accomplished. I'll look here to the guys. Orthopedics is, it was on the slide, but other service lines that you guys have found have been easier to start up than others?
I wouldn't say easier.
Yeah, hold on one second. Let's get to Mike.
I'd say there's a certain standardization within the protocols. You mentioned earlier, start with the principles, so of course that's the baseline. And you have to be able to be flexible and nimble and move within different service lines. So they all have a different need. There's multiple variables within each service line, but one harder than the other. In my experience, I really haven't seen that. In fact, recently surgeons have become, in the last 2 to 3 years, have become more and more and more interested in this, such that we actually have a partner as we continue to move forward. And some of our very first conversations are not just with the team leadership and the administration, the hospital administrators, but actually the surgeons are now joining us at the table. And 3 to 4 to 5 years ago, we didn't see that as much as we do now. So our partnerships are expanding, and the skids are getting greased as we move forward. But it's still not easy. It still takes a lot of energy and a lot of time.
On that note, there's nothing else to say. Any other comments? Thank you guys so much. Brian, thank you. That was fantastic. Absolutely. So before you guys head out tonight, I just want to say one, thank you so much for joining us here in Dallas for the Ebpom USA Perioperative Practicum. A couple housekeeping things. We will be here tomorrow for the entirety of the program. I promise we will have the audio worked out for you guys. So don't worry about bringing earplugs or the feedback or anything. We'll get it worked out. Again, Slido. So if you have time, look at, see who's coming up on the agenda, and you can go ahead and start populating some of those questions. There are a couple polls that are up. Tonight, we're really, really excited to be having an educational dinner symposium, as we put it in the program. It's cocktail hour with some great discussion with some really cool people. So we'll have heavy hors d'oeuvres. It's really enough for dinner. But we will go live audio streaming from the event at 7 o'clock, and we start cocktails at 6. So good drinks, good food, great conversation. So please join us for that. So with that note, Saul, Monty, anything else? Vicki? No? Yeah, cheers. Thank you.